Picture a world map, but not the one you know. Forget the bold lines of modern nations and the crisscrossing web of flight paths. If you could wipe the slate clean and look deeper, past the topsoil and the forests, you would see a different world etched into the very skin of the planet. You would see the ghostly footprints of ancient caravans, the subtle scars of paths worn smooth by countless feet over centuries, the crumbling foundations of waystations that once echoed with the voices of traders speaking a dozen different tongues. These are the long-buried trade routes, the hidden arteries of commerce and culture that truly connected humanity long before the word globalization was ever spoken. For generations, their precise paths were little more than educated guesses, legends whispered in historical texts, but now they are whispering back. From the silent vacuum of space, satellites armed with technology that seems like pure science fiction are listening, peering through sand, jungle, and water to reveal these lost highways in stunning detail. This is not just archaeology, it is a form of time travel, allowing us to witness the flow of history itself. We are living in a golden age of discovery, where our understanding of the ancient world is being fundamentally rewritten with every pass of an orbital sensor. Think of the stories these paths could tell, the tons of salt carried on the backs of camels across the blistering Sahara, the bundles of silk carefully transported around the treacherous Taklamakan Desert, the precious blocks of jade hauled over the formidable mountains of Central Asia. These routes were the internet of their day, conduits for everything from spices and gems to religions, technologies, and ideas. They forged empires, fueled economies, and shaped the very fabric of our modern civilizations in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. In this video, we will embark on an unprecedented journey to explore 30 of these rediscovered routes. We will traverse the incense trails of Arabia, where the scent of frankincense once meant unimaginable wealth. We will walk the amber roads of the Baltic, where fossilized resin traveled from northern forests to the courts of Rome. We will navigate the Polynesian seafaring highways, vast aquatic paths crossed by master navigators in double-hulled canoes. From the high Andes to the depths of the Amazon, from the African savanna to the frozen Himalayas, we will see how satellite imaging is tearing back the veil of centuries. So prepare to see history in a completely new light. Prepare to understand that our world has always been deeply, intrinsically connected. This is the story of our shared human journey, written not in ink but in the landscape, and it is a story we are finally able to read. So how does this digital time machine actually work? Think about the landscape not as a static picture, but as a layered document. Every human activity, from building a wall to simply walking the same path for generations, leaves a faint but permanent signature on the earth. These are called crop marks, soil marks, and shadow marks, and they are the hieroglyphics that satellite sensors are trained to read. A buried stone wall, for instance, will affect how water drains and how plants grow above it. The vegetation directly over the wall might be stunted and paler, while in a buried ditch where soil and moisture are deeper, plants might grow taller and lusher, creating a darker, greener line. To our eyes on the ground, this is an invisible script, but from space, satellites equipped with multispectral scanners can detect these subtle differences in plant health and soil composition by measuring light far beyond the range of human vision. They see in wavelengths of infrared and near-infrared, where the contrast between healthy and stressed vegetation becomes starkly apparent, painting a clear picture of what lies beneath. Then there's radar, a truly revolutionary tool. radar satellites like the European Space Agency's Sentinel-1 constellation fire microwave pulses at the Earth. These waves can penetrate dry sand and soil, sometimes for several meters, and bounce back. By analyzing the returning signal, scientists can detect the texture and structure of the subsurface. A smooth, hard surface like an ancient road or a stone foundation will scatter the radar waves differently than the loose soil around it. This is how we can map entire road systems buried under the Saharan desert, or see the foundations of a lost city beneath a dense jungle canopy, all without ever breaking ground. This non-invasive aspect is perhaps its greatest gift to archaeology. For centuries, excavation, while invaluable, has been a destructive process. Once you dig a site, that particular context is gone forever. Remote sensing flips this model on its head. It allows archaeologists to conduct vast, continental-scale surveys from their desks, identifying promising targets with pinpoint accuracy before ever setting foot in the field. It preserves the site's integrity for future generations who will have even better technologies at their disposal. Pioneers in this field, like Dr. Sarah Parkak, use this technology not just for discovery but for protection. By regularly monitoring historical sites from orbit, they can spot the telltale signs of looting holes or illegal construction almost as soon as they appear, providing a powerful tool in the fight to preserve our shared cultural heritage. This marriage of space-age technology and ancient history has opened a window into our past that is broader and clearer than anything we've ever had, setting the stage for our first incredible rediscovery. Now, let's apply that incredible technology to a real-world mystery that has captivated historians for generations: the legendary Trans-Saharan trade routes. For centuries, we knew these paths existed from ancient texts and oral histories, describing caravans so vast they could be seen from days away, a slow-moving river of camels carrying unimaginable wealth across an ocean of sand. But the desert is a master of concealment. Shifting dunes and relentless winds buried the physical evidence, leaving the precise corridors of this trade network to the realm of educated guesswork. That all changed when archaeologists pointed satellite radar towards the Sahara. The same dry, sandy conditions that preserved artifacts also made the landscape remarkably transparent to radar waves. What emerged from the data was nothing short of a historical roadmap. The satellites didn't just find a single trail, they revealed a complex web of highways, each with its own story. They detected the subtle, linear depressions of paths compacted by millions of camel hooves over hundreds of years. They pinpointed the locations of long-vanished wells, essential oases that made the months-long journey possible, their outlines now clear as day from space. Even more astonishing, the technology revealed the ghostly foundations of fortified settlements and way stations built to protect the valuable cargo. Think about the sheer logistics of this operation. A single caravan could involve 10,000 camels, each carrying up to 400 pounds of goods. They transported gold from the rich deposits of West Africa, a region so prolific it was legendary in medieval Europe. They carried slabs of salt mined from the desert itself, a mineral so precious in the sub-Saharan heat that it was sometimes traded for its weight in gold. And they brought ivory, spices, and cola nuts north, returning with manufactured goods like textiles, weapons, and books from the Mediterranean world. The satellite imagery has now definitively confirmed the central role of legendary cities like Timbuktu and Gao. We can see their original layouts, their defensive walls, and the roads converging on them like spokes on a wheel. These were not isolated outposts, they were cosmopolitan hubs, bustling centers of learning, commerce, and culture that thrived because of their connection to a global network. This single discovery fundamentally rewrites a long-held narrative. It dismantles the outdated idea of an isolated Africa and replaces it with a picture of a continent that was a driving force in the medieval global economy. The gold that powered the currencies of North Africa and Southern Europe, the ivory that adorned the courts of kings, all flowed along these digitally resurrected paths, proving that the Sahara was not a barrier but a bridge. While the Northern Silk Road routes are celebrated in history books, skirting the edges of the Tian Shan Mountains, there existed a far more perilous southern branch that many believed was more myth than reality. This path plunged directly into the heart of the Taklamakan Desert, a vast basin whose name translates ominously to the place of no return or the sea of death. For centuries, the existence of this southern trail was hinted at in fragmented accounts and ancient maps, but its precise location and the full scope of its supporting infrastructure were shrouded in the same sands that consumed unlucky travelers. The desert's extreme aridity and constantly shifting dunes had effectively erased it from the visible landscape, creating one of archaeology's most tantalizing puzzles. That is, until satellites equipped with radar and multispectral imaging turned their gaze upon the region. The technology acted like a key, unlocking a hidden world beneath the surface. What the imagery revealed was a meticulously organized survival network. The satellites didn't just find a single, lonely trail. They illuminated a string of previously unknown oasis towns, positioned at intervals that matched a camel's typical day's journey. These weren't just random patches of greenery. They were deliberate way stations, established at locations where groundwater came close enough to the surface to support life. The data showed the faint, geometric outlines of buildings and walls clustered around these water sources, the ghostly blueprints of entire communities that once thrived in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. Further analysis of the satellite data brought even more stunning details to light. Researchers could identify the distinct rectangular footprints of caravanserais, fortified inns that offered shelter and security to merchants and their valuable cargo. They spotted the circular and square foundations of Buddhist stupas, religious monuments that served as both places of worship and vital landmarks for navigation. Perhaps most evocatively, the imagery even guided ground teams to ancient petroglyphs, rock carvings etched onto canyon walls that had been hidden for centuries. These carvings depicted scenes of caravans, deities, and everyday life, serving as a permanent signpost and a testament to the countless souls who passed that way. This southern branch was far more than a simple conduit for silk. It was a capillary of civilization, pumping not just material goods but the very essence of culture across continents. Buddhism traveled this path from India into China, transforming the spiritual landscape of East Asia. Technologies like glassmaking and papermaking moved west, while astronomical knowledge and new artistic styles flowed east. The discovery of this branch fundamentally changes our understanding of the Silk Road as a whole. It was never a single, monolithic highway. Instead, it was a complex, adaptive web of interconnected paths, a fluid network that shifted with political winds, climate changes, and bandit activity. Travelers would choose their route based on the season, the current political stability of a region, and the specific goods they were carrying. The southern branch, though brutally harsh, often offered a more direct route and avoided the tariffs and political machinations of the northern kingdoms. This revelation of a multifaceted, living network finds a powerful parallel in another part of the world, where an empire engineered its own breathtaking web of roads across a completely different, yet equally challenging landscape. From the scorching deserts of Asia we now ascend into the thin, cold air of the Andes Mountains, where another empire mastered its brutal environment with a network of roads so advanced it stuns modern engineers. The Inca Empire, at its height, constructed what is arguably the greatest highway system of the ancient world, a masterwork of engineering known as the Quhapac-Ñan, or the Royal Road. This wasn't a single path but a vast web of arteries spanning over 25,000 miles, connecting an empire that stretched from modern-day Colombia all the way down to Chile. For generations, we've known about the main routes, the spectacular stone-paved trails that climb to dizzying heights like Machu Picchu. But the true, full extent of this network, especially its remote branches plunging into the dense, mist-shrouded cloud forests on the eastern slopes of the Andes, remained one of South America's great secrets. The Spanish conquest deliberately dismantled and abandoned many of these routes to fracture the empire they had overthrown, and the relentless jungle quickly reclaimed them, hiding their wonders from view for centuries. The key to finding them again was a specific type of satellite technology called LIDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Think of LIDAR as a powerful laser scanner fired from an aircraft or satellite. It sends out millions of light pulses, and by measuring how long they take to bounce back, it can create an exquisitely detailed, three-dimensional map of the ground surface. Its greatest power is its ability to digitally strip away the vegetation. Where a human explorer or a standard satellite camera sees only an impenetrable green canopy, LIDAR sees straight through the leaves, revealing the bare earth beneath. When researchers first processed the LIDAR data over the Peruvian cloud forests, the results were breathtaking. The landscape, once a blank green slate, was suddenly etched with the clear, geometric lines of human ambition. They discovered entire sections of paved roads snaking along near vertical cliff faces, roads that no historian knew existed. They found the telltale anchor points and abutments of sophisticated suspension bridges made from woven grass, stronger than steel cables, which once spanned deep ravines. These were not crude ropes, they were marvels of fiber engineering that could carry Inca soldiers and officials across gaps that would otherwise have meant a days-long detour. The imagery also revealed a host of supporting infrastructure that brought this network to life. Small, rectangular foundations marked the sites of tambos or way stations, spaced a day's walk apart, where imperial runners and traveling administrators could find shelter and supplies. Most strikingly, the scans showed vast, previously unknown agricultural terraces carved into impossibly steep mountainsides. This was the true genius of the system. These roads weren't just for travel. They were the supply lines that connected remote, fertile valleys producing specialized goods to the administrative heart of the empire. Staple crops like quinoa and potatoes, along with ritually and medicinally significant coca leaves, could be efficiently moved from these hinterlands to the capital at Cusco and to the high-altitude armies that secured the empire's borders. This logistical network was powered by the Chasqui, the legendary relay runners. These highly trained men operated in a system not unlike a physical internet, passing quippers, knotted strings that encoded complex information along the road at a blistering pace. A message could travel over 200 miles in a single day, a speed unmatched anywhere in the world until the invention of the telegraph. The discovery of these hidden extensions fundamentally changes our perception of the Inca Empire. It was not a state confined to the high Andes, but one that exerted powerful control and influence deep into the Amazonian foothills. Its reach was far greater, its organization even more sophisticated, and its ability to integrate diverse ecological zones into a single, functioning economy was nothing short of revolutionary. This mastery over a formidable continental landscape, connecting mountain peaks to jungle lowlands, finds a stunning parallel in a culture that achieved a similar feat not across mountains, but across the world's largest ocean. Now, let's shift our perspective from the mountainous spine of South America to the world's largest and most featureless landscape, the open Pacific Ocean. For generations, Western scholars struggled to comprehend how the Polynesian people could have possibly settled the scattered islands of the Pacific, a domain covering nearly a third of our planet. The prevailing theory for a long time was one of accidental drift, that fishermen were blown off course by storms and simply stumbled upon new land by pure luck. This idea, however, completely underestimated one of humanity's most brilliant navigational traditions. To the Polynesians, the ocean was not a terrifying, empty barrier. It was a familiar, readable highway, etched with clues that guided them on voyages of intentional exploration and trade that connected a vast, aquatic continent. Their vessels, the massive double-hulled canoes known as waiakolua, were the ocean-going freighters of their day. These were not simple rafts, they were sophisticated crafts capable of carrying dozens of people, along with their plants, animals, and cargo, across thousands of miles of open sea. They navigated without any instruments, without maps, without a compass. Instead, they used a system of wayfinding so advanced it feels almost supernatural. They memorized the precise positions of hundreds of stars, knowing which ones would pass directly over which islands. They read the ocean itself like a map, observing the subtle patterns of swells as they reflected off distant land masses, patterns a trained navigator could feel through the hull of the canoe. They watched for specific species of birds, knowing their flight ranges would point the way to land. They even detected the faint, unique smell of a volcanic island's vegetation carried on the wind long before it was visible on the horizon. For centuries, this was all based on the powerful oral histories of Polynesian cultures themselves. But how could modern science possibly prove the extent of these routes? This is where satellite technology performs another kind of magic, not by looking at the land, but by analyzing the sea. Researchers realized that the very pathways of these ancient voyages left a faint, biological signature in the ocean that satellites can detect from space. By mapping data on ocean chlorophyll levels, which indicates plankton blooms and richer marine life and sea surface temperatures, they could identify the marine highways that the Polynesians would have followed. These are the routes where currents and winds were most favorable, and where the chances of finding fish and seabirds for sustenance were highest. When this oceanic data is overlaid with the locations of known archaeological sites across the Pacific, from Hawaii to Rapa Nui, from Aotearoa to the Marquesas, a stunningly clear pattern emerges. The satellite maps reveal a deliberate, branching network of sea roads connecting these islands. We can now trace the likely paths of canoes carrying specific trade goods. For instance, basalt from quarries on one island, used for making durable adzes and tools, has been found on islands hundreds of miles away. Volcanic glass, essential for creating sharp cutting edges, was transported across vast distances. This wasn't random movement, it was a sustained economic network. The discovery of these seafaring highways does more than just confirm a historical fact. It fundamentally restores agency and intellectual triumph to the Polynesian people. It proves their voyages were not accidents, but feats of incredible courage, skill, and scientific understanding. They possessed a complex body of knowledge about their environment that rivaled any land-based civilization. This mastery over the immense, trackless sea finds a fascinating parallel in a culture that achieved a similar dominance over one of the most austere and challenging landscapes on Earth, the vast, waterless deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. The wealth of empires once quite literally hung on the scent of smoke, frankincense and myrrh, the aromatic resins harvested from gnarled trees in the remote regions of southern Arabia, were among the most coveted commodities of the ancient world. They were not mere luxuries, they were essentials for religious ritual, used in vast quantities by temples from Jerusalem to Rome, and for medicine and burial rites, making their supply a matter of spiritual and social life. For centuries, the paths these precious cargoes took on their long journey from the fabled lands of Arabia, Felix, modern-day Oman and Yemen, to the markets of the Mediterranean were known only through the grand, almost mythical accounts of classical writers like Pliny the Elder, who wrote of the immense fortunes of the caravan kingdoms. The desert, however, had swallowed the physical evidence, leaving the incense trail as a shimmering mirage in the historical record, its details blurred by time and sand. This is where the unblinking eye of orbital observation has stepped in, transforming legend into a precise, mapped reality. Satellite imagery, particularly radar, has cut through the centuries of sediment to reveal the intricate web of this ancient economic powerhouse. What we now see is not a single, lonely track, but a sophisticated network of parallel and converging routes, a logistical system designed for survival and profit. The imagery clearly shows the deep, parallel ruts of countless camel caravans, paths worn into the landscape over hundreds of years of continuous use. More importantly, it has pinpointed the critical infrastructure that made the journey possible. The satellites have located a chain of ancient wells, strategically placed at intervals that matched a camel's endurance, their locations now marked by subtle changes in soil moisture and vegetation that are invisible from the ground. This network reveals a brilliant strategy of desert navigation. The routes did not recklessly strike out across open sand dunes. Instead, the satellite maps show them meticulously clinging to the relative safety of wadis, dry riverbeds that provided not only a firmer surface for travel, but also subterranean water and occasional patches of vegetation for the animals. They snaked through mountain passes which offered defensive positions against raiders and more moderate temperatures than the scorching basin floors. This carefully chosen path was the lifeblood of the trade, and it leads directly to one of the most spectacular cities ever carved from stone, Petra. The satellite data shows feeder routes converging on this Nabatean capital from the south, confirming its role as the central clearinghouse for incense. From space, we can see how the city's genius for water management, with its complex system of channels and cisterns, was not just for sustaining a population, but for supporting the massive caravans that were its source of wealth. The imagery reinforces the historical accounts of the Nabateans' fierce protection of their monopoly, controlling the water sources along the route to force all merchants to pass through their city and pay hefty taxes. This tangible evidence from orbit provides stunning validation for stories that have been told for millennia. It confirms that the Queen of Sheba's legendary wealth and King Solomon's opulent temple were built on a foundation of this fragrant trade. The ghostly camel tracks and fortified way stations seen from space are the very same that made the kingdoms of the Nabateans and Sabaeans rich beyond measure, funding the construction of their magnificent rock-cut cities. This trade in aromatic luxury, which revolved around ritual and status, presents a powerful contrast to a trade founded on sheer biological necessity, a commerce in a mineral so fundamental to life that it created a path of its own through one of the most unforgiving deserts on Earth. From the fragrant, wealth-laden trails of the Incense Road, we now turn to a trade built not on luxury but on sheer biological necessity, the Darb El-Arba'in, or the 40 Days Road. This legendary salt route represents a different kind of human struggle, one where survival was the currency and the desert itself was the ultimate adversary. For over a millennium, immense caravans, sometimes comprising thousands of camels and guided by the expert Tebu people, undertook a brutal 40-day trek from the salt mines of Central Africa, like those in the Tibesti Mountains, to the bustling markets of Egypt. This was not a journey for the faint of heart. It was a calculated gamble against thirst, starvation, and sunstroke, a testament to the lengths humans will go to acquire a mineral so common to us today, yet so vital to life itself. Before satellite imagery, the full, terrifying scale of this enterprise was known only through oral histories and the sparse accounts of a handful of medieval chroniclers. The Sahara, in its immense and silent way, had guarded its secrets well. But when researchers began analyzing high-resolution satellite photos of the desert between Chad and Egypt, the ghost of this colossal undertaking rose from the sands with stunning clarity. The most arresting feature visible from orbit is not a structure but a scar, a vast linear depression running for hundreds of miles across the desert floor. This is not a natural geological formation. It is a path literally worn down into the earth by the relentless, plodding footsteps of countless camels over the course of centuries. Think of the sheer cumulative weight required to physically lower the level of the desert itself. Each caravan with its 10,000 or more camels, each animal carrying massive slabs of salt, acted like a slow-moving geological force, grinding the path deeper with every passing year. This visible groove in the planet's surface is a permanent record of endurance, a highway carved not by engineers but by commerce and survival. The satellite analysis went far beyond just mapping this central artery. It pinpointed the critical infrastructure of this desert voyage. The imagery revealed the subtle, circular outlines of long-vanished temporary settlements, ghost towns that would spring to life only when a caravan was passing through. More poignantly, the satellites identified simple, isolated burial cairns scattered along the route's periphery. These silent markers offer a heartbreaking glimpse into the human cost of this trade. They speak of merchants, guides, and slaves who succumbed to the desert's harshness, their final resting places forever oriented along the commercial path that claimed their lives. This commerce was fueled by a stark and brutal economic reality. In the heat of the African continent, salt was not just a seasoning. It was essential for regulating bodily fluids and preserving food in an era before refrigeration. Its value was so immense that it created a terrifying equation of human worth. Historical records and the patterns of settlement discovered by satellite suggest that a common transaction along this route was the direct barter of salt for slaves. A healthy individual might be traded for a specific number of salt bars, a chilling illustration of how a life-sustaining mineral could also fuel a system of human bondage. The Darb El-Arba'in stands as a powerful, sobering monument to ancient economics, revealing a world where necessity drove innovation and endurance, but also where it could perpetuate profound human suffering. This narrative of a harsh, elemental trade, where a commodity was literally worth its weight in human life, finds a fascinating and beautiful contrast in our next journey, which takes us from the searing heat of the Sahara to the cool, amber-lit forests of the ancient north. Leaving the sun-scorched salt routes of Africa behind, our journey now takes us to the cool, shadowy forests of northern Europe, where another kind of treasure was pried from the earth, not from mines but from the sea itself. For the Roman Empire, amber was a substance of near magical allure. This fossilized tree resin, warmed to a golden glow by the hand, was fashioned into exquisite jewelry, amulets, and even intricate gaming pieces for the wealthy elite. Roman naturalists like Pliny the Elder spun fantastic tales of its origins, suggesting it was the petrified tears of poplar trees or the hardened urine of the lynx, a testament to its mysterious and distant source. While they knew it came from the wild, northern lands beyond the Rhine, the precise, overland pathways these golden stones traveled, the legendary Amber Road remained frustratingly vague, lost to the dense woodlands and the passage of time. The mystery lay in the landscape itself. Unlike the stark, visible trails of the Sahara, these routes wound through ancient, trackless forests and across soft, boggy ground that would have left few permanent, visible marks for traditional archaeology to find. It was a ghost road, its existence proven by the presence of amber in Roman sites and Baltic amber deposits, but its specific course was little more than a dotted line on a historical map. This is where satellite technology performed a different kind of magic. Instead of using radar to penetrate dry sand, analysts employed multispectral imaging to peer through the canopy of modern forests and across cultivated fields. They looked for the subtle, lingering signatures of ancient human passage. What they discovered were ghostly trackways, linear features visible only as slight variations in soil moisture and vegetation health. These were the faint echoes of paths trodden by countless feet over centuries, compacting the earth in a way that still affects how water drains and how plants root today. The satellite data also revealed the logic of the route, identifying the most likely locations for river crossings, fords, and shallow points that would have been used long before bridges were ever built. When this web of potential paths was overlaid with the known locations of major amber deposit sites along the Baltic coast and the established Roman trading posts and military forts to the south, a clear and coherent commercial corridor snapped into focus. This was no single meandering path, but a network of branches that converged into major trunk routes, funneling the precious cargo toward the Roman frontier along the Danube River. But to view the Amber Road as a simple, one-way street for luxury goods is to miss its true, profound significance. This corridor was a vibrant two-way artery of exchange. While wagon loads of raw amber traveled south, Roman goods and innovations flowed north in return. The satellites haven't just found paths. The distribution of Roman artifacts, coins, fine pottery, bronze vessels, and glassware found at settlements along this corridor paints a vivid picture of a thriving economic and cultural dialogue. This exchange went far beyond consumer goods. It was along these forest tracks that advanced technologies, particularly in metalworking, filtered into Germanic societies. Roman smithing techniques, designs for weapons, and knowledge of alloy production were absorbed and adapted by local craftsmen, gradually transforming the material culture of Northern Europe. The Amber Road, therefore, was not merely a commercial route. It was a crucial interface, a place where the sophisticated Mediterranean world of the Romans met the vibrant tribal cultures of the European interior. It facilitated a slow, steady transfer of knowledge that would shape the development of Europe for centuries to come, proving that these ancient highways carried ideas that were, in the long run, far more valuable than the beautiful golden trinkets that initially sparked the trade. For thousands of years, Chinese emperors and artisans held a deep, almost spiritual reverence for a single, beautiful stone. Jade was not merely a decorative material. It was considered the essence of heaven and earth, a symbol of purity, moral integrity, and even immortality. The most exquisite of these stones, a creamy white or vibrant green nephrite, did not originate within China itself, but from one of the most remote and inhospitable places on the planet, the towering, ice-capped Kunlun and Tian Shan mountain ranges of Central Asia. The journey of this stone from its treacherous source to the royal workshops of ancient China was one of the world's great early commercial epics, a saga written not in texts but in the very geology of the landscape. For centuries, the precise paths of these jade routes were a matter of legend, lost to the shifting sands and high-altitude winds of the Taklamakan Desert Basin. Now, satellite imagery is mapping this forgotten network, revealing the incredible logistics behind a trade that fundamentally shaped Asian history. The first breakthrough from space was the identification of the ancient quarry sites themselves. Using multispectral imaging, analysts can detect the unique mineral signatures of nephrite deposits. The satellites pinpointed areas of massive disturbance on remote mountainsides, where generations of laborers had painstakingly extracted colossal boulders from the living rock. But the truly astonishing revelation was how these multi-ton stones were moved. The imagery shows a clear, two-stage transportation system that leveraged the forces of nature. For the first and most dangerous leg of the journey, the raw jade boulders were maneuvered onto mountain riverbeds. Then, during the brief, violent spring melt, the raging torrents of snowmelt would carry these incredibly heavy stones downstream, tumbling them for dozens, sometimes hundreds of miles. Satellite photos show these ancient river corridors with telltale scrape marks and impact zones along the banks, a permanent record of this natural yet brutally efficient shipping method. Where the rivers dissipated into the flat, open desert, the journey transitioned to human power. This is where the satellite data reveals the next phase, the overland caravan routes. The imagery clearly shows tracks branching out from the river termination points, heading east towards the heart of China. These were not simple, wandering paths. They were deliberate roads, often skirting the most lethal dunes of the Taklamakan by tracing the line between the desert and the foothills of the mountains, a corridor that provided access to scattered oases. The satellites have identified the remains of way stations and fortified outposts along these routes, built to protect both the valuable cargo and the merchants from bandits and the elements. This jade trade was not a later addition to the Silk Road. It was, in many ways, its precursor. Centuries before silk became the dominant commodity, these paths were already well established, facilitating the movement of a stone that was culturally indispensable to the Chinese elite. This network created the first durable economic and cultural links between the agrarian civilizations of the East and the nomadic and oasis-dwelling cultures of Central Asia. It was a relationship built on a profound desire for beauty and spiritual symbolism, proving that long before the practicalities of silk, the human yearning for the sublime could carve highways across continents. The arduous journey of this prized stone, from mountain torrent to royal treasury, finds a fascinating parallel in the movement of a very different, yet equally vital, ancient material, one valued not for its beauty, but for its razor-sharp utility. Long before empires rose and fell, before the first written word was ever etched into clay, a different kind of network was already stitching together the human world. This story begins not with gold or silk, but with a shard of volcanic glass so sharp it could slice through flesh with surgical precision. In the Neolithic era, the heartland of modern-day Turkey was a geological treasure trove, home to massive volcanoes whose eruptions produced vast flows of obsidian. This glossy, black glass was the supermaterial of its day, capable of being knapped into blades, arrowheads, and scrapers far superior to the flint and chert available to most communities. For generations, archaeologists knew that this Anatolian obsidian was found hundreds of miles from its source, scattered across ancient villages in the Levant and Mesopotamia. But how did it get there? Were these simply isolated gifts passed from hand to hand in a slow, random drift? Or was there a deliberate, organized system at work, a commercial network operating millennia before the invention of money, writing, or the wheel? The answer was written into the landscape, waiting for the right technology to read it. Satellite-based geological mapping provided the first crucial piece of the puzzle. By analyzing the unique chemical fingerprint of obsidian from space, scientists could now pinpoint the exact volcanic calderas where specific deposits originated. The satellites didn't just identify the major sources, like the famous ones at Gerlu Dag and Nenezi Dag. They revealed a complex picture of multiple, smaller quarries, each with its own distinct quality of glass. This was the first hint of a sophisticated understanding of raw materials. Our Neolithic ancestors weren't just grabbing the nearest black rock. They were selectively mining from the best seams, demonstrating an early form of quality control and specialized knowledge. But the true revelation came when multispectral imaging was trained on the terrain surrounding these ancient quarries. What appeared to the naked eye as empty, rolling hillsides transformed into a web of faint, converging lines. These were the ghostly footprints of the world's first documented footpaths, trails worn smooth by the passage of countless traders over thousands of years. The imagery showed these paths leading directly from the quarry sites, not wandering aimlessly, but heading with purpose toward known Neolithic settlements far in the distance. We can now trace these routes as they navigated river valleys, circumvented marshes, and crossed mountain passes, creating a logical and efficient transportation network. The satellites have even identified what appear to be early way stations campsites marked by ancient hearths and debris piles of lower quality obsidian flakes, where traders might have rested and worked the raw material into more portable preforms before continuing their journey. By meticulously mapping the distribution of this distinctive glass from its source to its final resting place in villages across the Near East, a stunning picture emerges. This was not a haphazard trickle of goods. It was a structured, long-distance exchange network, a veritable highway system for the Stone Age. Villages in places like modern-day Jordan and Syria were connected directly to the Anatolian highlands by a chain of contact that spanned over 500 miles. This trade was the lifeblood of these early communities. A village that controlled a segment of this route, or that had skilled artisans who could work the glass, could gain significant prestige and wealth. The obsidian itself became a form of currency and a symbol of status. The existence of this network, fully illuminated by satellite technology, forces a dramatic rethink of our Neolithic ancestors. It shows us that the drive to trade, to seek out distant resources, and to establish complex economic relationships is not an advanced behavior that emerged with cities and kings. It is a fundamental, innate human impulse, the desire for a better tool, for a connection to the wider world, and for the social and economic benefits of exchange, was powerful enough to motivate people to undertake perilous journeys and establish connections across a vast and largely unknown landscape. This deep-seated human need to acquire and exchange vital resources would only intensify, setting the stage for a quest that would fuse entire continents and define a new age of humanity. The story of the Bronze Age is often told through its magnificent artifacts, gleaming swords, intricate ceremonial cauldrons, and ornate jewelry. But the very foundation of this entire era, the material that made it all possible, rested on a fragile and far-flung supply chain for a deceptively simple metal. Bronze is an alloy, a mixture of about 90% copper and 10% tin. While copper deposits were relatively common around the Mediterranean, high-quality tin was astonishingly rare. This scarcity turned the quest for tin into one of the most critical economic and political endeavors of the ancient world, creating a network that connected the fringes of the known world to its bustling centers. For a long time, historians theorized that the tin used by the great civilizations of the Mediterranean, from the Minoans to the Mycenaeans and later the Phoenicians, came from mysterious, vaguely defined lands to the far north and west. The ancient texts spoke of the Cassiterides, the Tin Islands, but their exact location was a closely guarded secret by the merchants who profited from the trade. We now know, thanks to the analytical power of satellite data, that these legendary sources were the rugged, Atlantic-facing regions of Cornwall in southwestern Britain and Brittany in northwestern France. These areas held Europe's richest and most accessible tin deposits, where the metal could be found in alluvial streams, panned from the gravel like gold. The satellites didn't just confirm the sources, they mapped the entire, sprawling journey of this vital commodity. The imagery reveals a sophisticated, multimodal transportation system that was centuries ahead of its time. The first leg of the journey often began with small, shallow draft boats moving the raw tin ingots along the intricate river systems of Britain and France. Satellite photos show the faint, overgrown remains of Bronze Age jetties and loading areas along these rivers. But rivers don't always flow where you need them to go, and this is where the satellite data reveals one of its most fascinating details: ancient portage routes. These were specially constructed pathways over land, used to drag boats and their heavy cargo between two navigable bodies of water. From space, analysts can identify these portages as linear earthworks, subtle raised causeways or worn-down trenches cutting across a peninsula or linking two river valleys. The sheer effort of creating and maintaining these overland links speaks volumes about the value of the cargo and the determination of these early traders. Once the tin reached the coast, the journey entered its most perilous and profitable phase. The satellites, by analyzing coastal geography and the locations of sunken shipwrecks identified through sonar and underwater imaging, have helped chart the likely coastal shipping lanes. This was not a simple hop along the shore. The imagery, combined with ocean current data, suggests that these Bronze Age mariners undertook daring open water crossings, riding the prevailing winds and currents from Brittany across the Bay of Biscay to northern Spain, and from Cornwall down to the trading hubs of what is now Portugal and southern France. This maritime highway was the final link in a chain that stretched over 1,500 miles. The tin would then be transported overland through Spain and France, or shipped across the Mediterranean to the primary bronze working centers of the Eastern Mediterranean. The economic impact of this network was profound. Control over any segment of this route, a river portage, a sheltered coastal bay, a trading post at a river mouth, could make a local chieftain immensely powerful. The wealth generated from taxing and protecting this trade fueled the rise of stratified societies and powerful elites across Atlantic Europe. The discovery of lavish Bronze Age burials in Wessex, England, filled with gold and amber from distant lands, is direct evidence of the wealth that flowed along these tin routes. This was the economic backbone of an age, a continent-wide system that exchanged British tin for Baltic amber, Mediterranean wine, and exotic goods from the south. This relentless search for a specific, rare metal to fuel technological progress is a theme that repeats itself throughout human history. It demonstrates that the drive for resources has always been a primary engine for exploration and interconnection, a motive that would soon propel other cultures to seek out their own vital materials in the most unexpected of places. While our previous routes traced the flow of metals and stone, our next journey follows the path of a far more delicious and, in its own way, equally powerful commodity, the cacao bean. In the world of the ancient Maya and Aztecs, chocolate was not merely a sweet treat, it was money that grew on trees. Cacao beans were a standardized currency, used to pay for everything from a basket of tomatoes in a market to the labor of a skilled artisan. A rabbit might cost 10 beans, a slave could be worth 100, and the services of a porter for a long journey might run you 1,000. This was an economy literally built on chocolate, and the security of the trade routes that carried it was as vital to these civilizations as the protection of a royal mint. But for a long time, the specific geography of this cacao network was shrouded by the dense rainforests of Mesoamerica, leaving historians to piece together its flow from scattered pottery shards and tantalizing references in ancient texts. The breakthrough came when researchers turned to satellite technology, not to look for buried roads this time, but to reconstruct the very environment that made this trade possible. By using satellite data to model ancient climates, rainfall patterns, and soil types, scientists could create a digital map of prime cacao cultivation zones. The cacao tree is a notoriously finicky plant, requiring specific conditions of heat, humidity, and shade to thrive. The satellite models brilliantly highlighted the lowland rainforest regions of the Gulf Coast and the Pacific slope of Guatemala as veritable breadbaskets for this valuable bean. This gave archaeologists the where, but they still needed the how. This is where other forms of remote sensing filled in the gaps. LIDAR technology, which strips away the jungle canopy, has revealed an astonishing network of ancient causeways known as Sakpio by the Maya. These were not mere footpaths, they were raised, paved roads, sometimes spanning over 60 miles, that connected cities and resource areas. Many of these causeways, visible only from above, lead directly from the highland political centers down into the identified lowland cacao zones. They were the interstate highways for chocolate, allowing porters to transport heavy loads of beans efficiently, even during the rainy season when other routes turned to mud. The evidence doesn't stop with the roads themselves. The distribution of distinctive pottery styles tells its own story. In the cacao-growing lowlands, archaeologists find pottery that was manufactured in the highlands, evidence of goods flowing down into the rainforest. Conversely, in the highland capitals like the immense metropolis of Teotihuacan, they find pottery vessels from the lowlands, often chemically tested, and found to contain residues of theobromine, a chemical fingerprint of chocolate. The imagery allows us to see the entire system, the beans traveling up the causeways from the humid groves, carried by traders into the heart of power, where they were transformed from a simple agricultural product into a pillar of society. This transformation happened because cacao was deeply woven into the very fabric of ritual and power. For the Maya, chocolate was a sacred drink, a gift from the gods. It was consumed during royal coronations, religious ceremonies, and elite diplomatic meetings. The frothy, often spiced beverage was served in intricately painted vessels, and its consumption was a public display of status and divine favor. To control the cacao trade was to control a piece of the sacred. The rulers who secured these supply lines could reward their loyal nobles with this prestigious good, fund their armies by paying soldiers in a universally accepted currency, and demonstrate their far-reaching influence by serving a drink that had traveled from a distant, almost mythical land of plenty. The story of the cacao trails is a profound lesson in how a single commodity can transcend its material value to become a cultural force, shaping economics, politics, and spirituality in equal measure. The sweetness and luxury associated with this ancient chocolate stand in stark contrast to the next commodity on our list, a substance valued not for its taste or ritual significance, but for its stark, utilitarian necessity in sealing and preserving the vessels of everyday life. Our journey now takes us from the sacred cacao groves of the Americas to the stark, mineral-rich shores of the lowest point on Earth, the Dead Sea. Here, a very different kind of commodity fueled an ancient industry, one valued not for its taste or spiritual symbolism, but for its stark, practical utility. This was bitumen, a naturally occurring tar, a black, viscous substance that seeps to the surface along the edges of this super-salty lake. To our modern eyes, it might seem like a mundane, even unpleasant material, but in the ancient world, it was a substance of immense importance, a versatile industrial product with applications that spanned from the sacred to the utterly practical. In ancient Egypt, bitumen was a crucial component of the mummification process. It was used to coat the linen wrappings and sometimes poured directly into the body cavity, acting as a powerful preservative and waterproofing agent, believed to help secure the deceased's body for the afterlife. The very word mummy is derived from the Persian term mumia, meaning bitumen, because early observers mistakenly thought the blackened corpses were covered in the substance. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles to the northeast, the civilizations of Mesopotamia, living between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, relied on bitumen for far more earthly concerns. They used it as a powerful waterproofing agent, slathering it on the hulls of their boats and sealing the baskets and cisterns that held their precious water and grain. It was used as mortar to hold bricks together in their monumental ziggurats and palaces, and even as an early form of adhesive and insulation. For centuries, historians knew the Dead Sea, known as Lake Asphaltites in the classical era, was the primary source for this material, but the scale and sophistication of the extraction and trade network remained largely speculative. The secrets of this black gold trade were, quite literally, submerged beneath the Dead Sea's famously dense, buoyant waters and scattered across the surrounding desert. This is where the penetrating gaze of satellite technology has once again rewritten the narrative, revealing an industrial operation of surprising complexity. Multispectral imaging and radar have cut through the water's unusual mineral content to reveal the ghostly outlines of what can only be described as ancient industrial infrastructure. The satellites have identified the remains of submerged jetties and loading docks built out from the shoreline, structures designed to handle heavy, bulky cargo. They've pinpointed the locations of what appear to be storage facilities and processing sites on the coast, where the raw, floating lumps of bitumen were collected from the lake's surface and prepared for transport. But perhaps the most stunning discovery from orbit is the clear evidence of dedicated shipping lanes. The satellite data shows a pattern of ancient maritime traffic crossing the Dead Sea, connecting the extraction sites on its eastern and southern shores with distribution points on the western side, closer to the land routes leading to the Mediterranean. This wasn't a haphazard fishing boat operation. This was organized, regular transport, a scheduled ferry service for tar. Once the bitumen reached the western shores, the land-based phase of its journey began. Satellite imagery has mapped out a network of tracks leading from these Dead Sea ports up through the Judean desert and towards the bustling ports of the Mediterranean coast, such as those in ancient Philistia and Phoenicia. From these ports, the bitumen was loaded onto larger seafaring vessels and shipped across the Mediterranean, reaching Egypt, Cyprus, and beyond. The entire operation, from collection to long-distance export, reveals a highly organized and lucrative industry. The Nabateans, the same desert traders who controlled the Incense Trail, likely also managed segments of this bitumen trade, adding another lucrative, if less fragrant, commodity to their economic portfolio. The discovery of this network forces us to expand our definition of what constituted a valuable trade good in antiquity. It wasn't all gold, silk, and spices. The economy of the ancient world also rested on the sturdy shoulders of industrial materials like bitumen. This mundane, tarry substance was essential for death rituals in Egypt, for urban infrastructure in Mesopotamia, and for maritime technology across the region. Its trade supported countless laborers, sailors, and merchants, creating a supply chain that was every bit as vital as those for more glamorous items. This focus on a practical, waterproofing material that sealed the boats of traders provides a perfect bridge to our next destination, where the rhythm of trade was dictated not by camels or carts, but by the immense, predictable power of the wind itself. Now let's set sail on a different kind of highway, one that was defined not by packed earth or stone, but by the very air itself. For the merchants of antiquity, the Indian Ocean was not a chaotic, storm-tossed barrier, but a predictable, seasonal conveyor belt. They mastered a phenomenon known as the monsoon, a system of winds that reverses direction with clockwork regularity. For half the year, the winds blow steadily from the southwest, pushing ships from the coast of Africa toward India and the shores of Southeast Asia. Then, as if on a celestial schedule, the winds shift, blowing from the northeast for the other 6 months, carrying those same vessels back home. This wasn't just sailing, it was a form of time-based navigation, an ancient maritime calendar that dictated the rhythms of commerce across a vast aquatic world. For generations, the full physical footprint of this network, the ports, the anchorages, the specific landing points, was largely inferred from texts and scattered archaeological finds. The ocean had risen since the last ice age, swallowing the crucial coastal infrastructure that made this system work. But satellites, with their ability to peer into the shallow coastal waters, have now dredged up this sunken world, revealing the concrete skeleton of the world's first truly globalized trade network. Using a combination of multispectral imaging and underwater sonar data integrated with satellite positioning, researchers have mapped a string of now submerged ports and anchorages along the coasts of India, East Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. These weren't grand, stone-built harbors, but often simpler, functional sites, natural coves protected by reefs, or river mouths that offered safe haven. The satellite data reveals the subtle, rectangular outlines of jetties and wharves now lying just beneath the waves, and the circular patterns of old anchor stones resting on the seabed, marking where countless ships once waited for the winds to change. This physical evidence confirms the incredible reach of this maritime web. We can now trace the routes from the vibrant trading cities of the Swahili coast, like Kilwa and Mombasa, all the way to the bustling ports of Gujarat in India and onward to the strategic straits of Malacca. But the satellites didn't just find the ports, they helped map the flow of goods themselves. By identifying the locations of terrestrial archaeological sites from space often visible as mounds or soil discolorations, and then guiding targeted excavations, researchers have been able to piece together a stunning picture of exchange. At these sites, from Zanzibar to Sri Lanka, they find a consistent pattern of material culture. Distinctive pottery from China, like delicate celadon ware, appears alongside rougher, utilitarian cooking pots from East Africa. Carnelian beads, meticulously crafted in workshops in ancient India, are found in grave sites in Oman. Shattered remains of amphorae that once held Roman wine appear in southern Indian ports. This distribution, made clear through satellite-guided archaeology, maps a breathtaking circuit of commerce. This was the conduit for the legendary spices of the East, pepper from the Malabar coast, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, and cloves and nutmeg from even farther east. It carried fragrant sandalwood, brilliant gemstones like rubies and sapphires, and fine cotton textiles from India to the Roman Empire and the Islamic world. In return, African gold, ivory, and exotic hardwoods flowed east. This was more than a simple exchange of luxury items. It was a massive, sustained dialogue between continents. The Monsoon network was the internet of the ancient world, a system that moved not just goods, but people, languages, religions, and technologies. It was along these routes that Islam spread peacefully to Southeast Asia, carried by merchants and Sufi mysticals. It was how Buddhism reached its peak influence in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. The architectural styles of Swahili coastal towns, with their ornate doors and coral brick buildings, reflect a fusion of African, Arab, and Indian influences that could only have happened through centuries of intimate contact. This system created a shared cultural and economic zone that stretched from the shores of Mozambique to the islands of Indonesia. a zone of interaction that was, in many ways, more integrated than the Mediterranean world. The sheer scale and sophistication of this network, now so vividly confirmed from orbit, forces us to reconsider the very origins of globalization. This was not a phenomenon that began with European explorers in the Age of Sail. It was a vibrant, complex, and enduring system that connected the Eastern Hemisphere for over a millennium, laying the groundwork for the interconnected world we know today. And the most powerful magnet, the commodities that drew this entire network into existence, were the spices that grew in a tiny, volcanic archipelago at its far eastern edge. Now let us sail eastward from the vast monsoon highways of the Indian Ocean to the very source of the spices that made those routes so fabulously profitable. We arrive at a volcanic archipelago scattered like emeralds across the equator, a place of immense global consequence known as the Maluku Islands, or simply the Spice Islands. For centuries, this was the only place on Earth where the nutmeg tree and the clove tree grew wild. These were not just culinary ingredients, they were symbols of status and wealth in medieval Europe, believed to ward off plague and preserve food, and they were worth pound for pound more than gold. The desperate European quest to find and control these islands literally reshaped the world map, launching the age of exploration and colonial empire. Yet, for all the volumes written about the Portuguese, Dutch, and Spanish battles for control of these islands, the original internal trade network operated by the indigenous people remained largely a mystery, overshadowed by the grand narrative of global colonialism. The story of how these spices moved from the steep, volcanic slopes where they grew to the beaches where they were first encountered by foreign sailors was a story the jungle had kept secret. That is, until satellites began to map the island's interior, revealing a sophisticated and entirely homegrown commercial system. The imagery reveals a landscape meticulously engineered for production and protection. On the steep, fertile slopes of islands like Ternate and Tidor, multispectral analysis shows the clear, geometric patterns of ancient terraced gardens. These weren't haphazard clearings, they were carefully managed agroforestry systems where nutmeg and clove trees were cultivated alongside food crops, creating a sustainable and highly productive environment. The very shape of the land was altered to maximize the yield of these precious commodities, but the spice groves were not left undefended. The satellite data also unveils a network of fortifications that predates any European castle. The images show the distinct, often circular or star-shaped, outlines of earthen and stone ramparts built on strategic hilltops overlooking the groves and the pathways leading to them. These were not built to repel European galleons, but to defend against rival local kingdoms and pirates who sought to control the source of this incredible wealth. The internal movement of the spices was a marvel of logistics. LIDAR technology, which can see through the dense rainforest canopy, has now charted a complex web of narrow paths and trails connecting the inland terraces to specific coastal villages. These paths were not random. They followed the most efficient routes down the mountainsides, often converging at river systems. The imagery shows how these land routes seamlessly integrated with water transport. Canoes would navigate the narrow, jungle-lined rivers, collecting the bundled spices from inland collection points and ferrying them out to the coast, where they were stored in specialized stilt houses over the water, ready for the arrival of the seasonal foreign traders from Java, China, and eventually Europe. This intricate internal network was the indispensable first link in a global commercial chain. The nutmeg and cloves that eventually found their way into the treasuries of European kings and the pharmacies of wealthy merchants began their journey on the backs of local traders along these now revealed paths. The entire global economy of spice, with all its attendant exploration, conflict, and cultural exchange, was utterly dependent on this initial, indigenous system of production and distribution. It was a system that understood the value of what it possessed, a system that cultivated, protected, and transported its treasures with a sophistication that the European newcomers initially failed to recognize, seeing only the resources to be seized, not the civilization that had mastered them. The discovery of this network restores a critical chapter to the story, highlighting that the Spice Islands were not a passive prize to be discovered, but an active, organized participant in a trade that would ultimately encircle the entire planet. This revelation of a trade system deeply integrated with the specific ecology of a lush, volcanic archipelago presents a profound contrast to our next destination, where commerce was woven into a landscape of breathtaking austerity, and where the paths themselves were not just physical but spiritual. But now we journey to a continent where the very concept of a trade route transcends the physical world, where commerce and cosmology are one and the same. In Australia, for the Aboriginal peoples, the landscape is a living, breathing text, inscribed with the stories of the ancestral beings who sang the world into existence during the dreaming. These stories are not merely told, they are walked, performed, and remembered along intricate pathways known as songlines or dreaming tracks. These are not simply trails from point A to point B. They are the sacred arteries of a continent, a complex network of navigation, law, history, and spirituality that has guided people for over 60,000 years. For generations, the full, continental scale of these songlines was a knowledge system held in the minds and songs of the people, largely invisible and incomprehensible to Western cartography, which could only draw lines on a flat, silent map. Now, in a remarkable fusion of ancient wisdom and modern technology, satellite imagery is beginning to reveal the profound physical logic embedded within these sacred geographies, offering a new way to visualize and understand this unparalleled cultural system. When researchers overlay satellite maps with the oral histories and song cycles shared by indigenous elders, a stunning pattern emerges. The song lines, which encode the epic journeys of ancestral beings like the rainbow serpent or the seven sisters, are not random wanderings. They consistently and logically follow the most vital and sustainable pathways across an often harsh and unforgiving landscape. The satellite imagery clearly shows these corridors tracing the courses of ancient river systems, even those that are now dry for most of the year, their paths visible from space as faint green veins of more resilient vegetation. They navigate between permanent waterholes, those crucial sources of life in the arid outback, and they align with distinctive geological features, a particular mountain range, an unusual rock formation, or a specific sand dune system. Each of these landmarks acts as a stanza in the epic song, a mnemonic device that triggers the memory of the next part of the story and the next leg of the journey. The land itself is the library and the songline is the index. This intricate knowledge system was the backbone for a continent-spanning trade network, but to call it mere trade is to miss its essence entirely. The movement of material goods was inseparable from the performance of the songs and the renewal of cultural law. Highly valued items traveled along these dreaming tracks, connecting communities thousands of miles apart. Ochre, a naturally occurring pigment used for sacred body paint and rock art, was mined from specific, spiritually significant quarries and traded across incredible distances. The deep, vibrant red ochre from a place like Parakilna in South Australia has been found in archaeological sites over 1,000 miles away. Pituri, a native tobacco with stimulating properties, was collected from Central Australia and traded along routes that followed the songlines, becoming a valuable commodity for ritual and social exchange. And from the northern coast, magnificent pearl shells from the Kimberley region were traded inland, their lustrous, otherworldly beauty carrying the essence of the sea deep into the desert heart of the continent. A trader carrying a bundle of pitchery or a precious piece of ochre was not just a merchant, he was a custodian of the song cycle that governed that particular track. His journey was a ritual act, a way of keeping the country alive and the stories breathing. The exchange of goods at a meeting place was as much about sharing the latest verses of the song, updating the news from distant kin, and reaffirming the reciprocal relationships between different language groups as it was about the material transaction. This system created a holistic view of commerce where economics, ecology, religion, and art were completely intertwined. The value of an object was not just in its utility or rarity, but in its story, in the sacred geography it had traversed and the ancestral connections it embodied. The discovery and digital mapping of these routes through satellite technology is providing powerful, tangible evidence to support indigenous land claims and cultural heritage protection. It offers a new language to demonstrate the deep, enduring, and systematic connection that Aboriginal peoples have to their country, a connection that has physically shaped the movement of people and goods across Australia for millennia. This profound, spiritual connection to the landscape, where every path is a prayer and every journey a ceremony, finds a powerful and unexpected echo on the other side of the world, in the vast river valleys of North America, where another ancient network connected a continent through commerce and earthworks. While the Songlines of Australia reveal a trade network woven into the very soul of a continent, a different kind of testament to ancient American ingenuity was hidden for centuries beneath the dense forests and farmlands of the American heartland. The story of North America before European contact was long misrepresented as a tale of scattered, isolated tribes, but we now know that a vast and vibrant web of commerce once pulsed along the great Mississippi River and its countless tributaries. This was not a simple barter system between neighbors. It was a continent-spanning economic engine that connected the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes and the Atlantic seaboard to the Great Plains, moving a stunning variety of goods across thousands of miles. For generations, the true scale of this network lay concealed. The grand earthen mounds, like the famous Monk's Mound at Cahokia, were visible, but they were seen as isolated wonders. The immense geometric earthworks, complex urban layouts, and the sprawling feeder settlements that connected them were largely invisible, swallowed by vegetation, and later plowed under by centuries of agriculture. The key that unlocked this hidden world was once again LIDAR technology. When archaeologists flew LIDAR scanners over the Mississippi River Valley, the results were revolutionary. The laser pulses digitally stripped away the modern tree cover, revealing a landscape utterly transformed by human hands. The ground was etched with the ghostly footprints of a lost civilization. The imagery showed not just the famous large mounds, but vast ceremonial plazas, enormous circular wooden structures that may have served as calendars, and extensive residential districts that housed thousands of people. Most importantly, LIDAR revealed a complex network of causeways and roads radiating out from these central hubs, connecting them to smaller settlements and, ultimately, to the great liquid highway of the Mississippi itself. These were the on-ramps and off-ramps of a continental exchange system. The goods that traveled this network tell a profound story of economic specialization and cultural connection. In the great ceremonial centers like Cahokia, located near modern-day St. Louis, archaeologists have unearthed raw copper that was mined from the southern shores of Lake Superior, over 800 miles to the north. This copper was painstakingly cold-hammered into ceremonial ornaments, breastplates, and ear spools, symbols of power and status for a privileged elite. From the opposite direction, from the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, came conch shells and other marine mollusks. These were carefully cut and engraved to create shell cups and gorgets, depicting intricate spiritual imagery. The shells, once part of a saltwater ecosystem, became sacred objects in a landlocked city, their presence a tangible link to a distant, almost mythical sea. From the quarries of southern Illinois came high-quality chert, a type of flint that was knapped into razor-sharp hoes for agriculture and lethal points for warfare and hunting, tools that were essential for both survival and expansion. This flow of materials was the lifeblood of what scholars call the Mississippian culture, which peaked between the years 900 and 1400. The city of Cahokia was its undisputed apex, a metropolitan hub that may have been home to 20,000 people at its height, a population that rivaled contemporary London. This dense urban concentration was only possible because of the highly organized and reliable trade network that supplied it: food from outlying farms, building materials for constant construction, and the prestigious goods that reinforced social hierarchy all moved along these routes. The entire system was likely coordinated by a powerful, theocratic elite who lived atop the great platform mounds, literally looking down upon the society they governed. They controlled the distribution of exotic goods, which in turn legitimized their authority and spiritual power. The discovery of this network completely shatters the old myth of a primitive, isolated pre-Columbian North America. It reveals a landscape dotted with powerful chiefdoms and sophisticated ceremonial centers that were in constant communication with one another. The people of Cahokia were not living in a vacuum. They were active participants in a dynamic economic sphere that stretched across half the continent. They engineered their environment on a massive scale, moving millions of cubic feet of earth to create their monuments, and they managed a complex economy that required long-distance logistics, diplomatic relations, and a shared system of cultural values that made a shell from the Gulf or a piece of copper from the north inherently valuable. This revelation of a powerful, river-based civilization thriving in the heart of North America provides a stunning parallel to the next chapter in our global journey, where we will leave the river valleys behind and ascend into the thin, cold air of the Himalayas to trace a trade route where the commodity was not a symbol of power, but an absolute necessity for survival itself. From the sprawling riverine network of the Mississippi, we now ascend into a world of thin air and stark necessity, where the very breath comes hard and the value of a common mineral was measured in human endurance. For centuries, the roof of the world was crisscrossed by some of the most arduous commercial journeys ever undertaken. Caravans of sure-footed yaks and hardy sheep, laden with heavy slabs of salt, navigated vertiginous paths across the highest mountain passes on Earth, connecting the salt-rich lakes of the Tibetan Plateau with the lush, populated valleys of Nepal below. This was the Trans-Himalayan salt trade, a vital economic and cultural lifeline that operated at the very limits of human and animal survival. While the existence of this trade was known, the specific, perilous routes these caravans took were often local knowledge, passed down through generations of traders and quickly reclaimed by the harsh, landslide-prone terrain. The immense scale and precise organization of this network remained one of Asia's great, unmapped stories, until satellite imagery turned its powerful gaze upon the dizzying heights of the Himalayas. The technology has performed a remarkable feat of digital cartography, tracing the faint, ancient trails etched into the sides of mountains. From orbit, analysts can identify the subtle, linear signatures of these paths as they snake along narrow ledges, ford icy rivers fed by glacial melt, and switch back up seemingly impassable slopes. The imagery has pinpointed the natural infrastructure that made these epic journeys possible. It has revealed the locations of shallow caves used for centuries as overnight resting spots, offering meager shelter from the biting wind and sub-zero temperatures. It has identified the remains of primitive yet robust bridges spanning deep chasms, and it has catalogued countless ancient cairns, piles of stones carefully stacked by generations of travelers. These cairns were far more than trail markers. They were spiritual offerings, a way to accumulate merit for a safe passage, creating a dotted line of silent prayers across the most treacherous geography on the planet. The motivation for undertaking such a fearsome journey was rooted in the most basic human need. In the remote, high-altitude valleys of Nepal, dietary salt was incredibly scarce. The human body cannot function without sodium. It is essential for nerve transmission, muscle function, and maintaining fluid balance. For communities living in these isolated areas, the salt carried down from the Tibetan plateau was not a luxury. It was a biological imperative, a matter of survival. The trade was a perfect example of complementary economies. The high, arid plains of Tibet held numerous salt lakes, where the mineral could be harvested directly from the crust of the earth in large, crystalline slabs. This resource was plentiful for the Tibetan nomads, but they lacked the grain and other agricultural products that grew in the lower valleys of Nepal. Thus, a direct barter system emerged, often conducted in silent, ritualized exchanges at designated high-altitude marketplaces. A standardized slab of Tibetan salt might be traded for a specific measure of Nepalese rice or corn, an economic relationship built entirely on mutual need. Yet, the legacy of these salt routes extends far beyond basic economics. These mountain paths became sacred conduits for one of history's most significant cultural and religious exchanges. For centuries, these very same trails were walked not only by salt traders, but also by Buddhist monks and pilgrims traveling from the great monastic centers of Tibet into Nepal and northern India, the very birthplace of the Buddha. The salt caravans and the pilgrim streams often flowed together, sharing the same resting caves and navigating by the same cairns. This constant movement facilitated a profound cross-pollination of ideas. Tibetan Buddhism, with its rich iconography and philosophical depth, filtered south into the Himalayan kingdoms, shaping the art, architecture, and spiritual life of regions like Mustang and Solu Khumbu. In return, texts, relics, and artistic influences from the ancient Indian heartland of Buddhism were carried back north along the salt roads, enriching the Tibetan tradition. The trails themselves became dotted with monasteries and chordons, Buddhist stupas, often built at the most commanding and perilous points along the route. These structures served as both spiritual sanctuaries and practical way stations, offering shelter and blessings to the traveling merchants. The salt, in a symbolic sense, was preserving more than just food. It was helping to preserve and spread an entire worldview, demonstrating how the most mundane of human necessities can become intertwined with the most profound aspects of culture. The physical challenge of moving goods across this formidable mountain range, where every step was a negotiation with gravity and altitude, finds a fascinating counterpoint in the next leg of our journey, where the primary obstacle was not height and cold, but a vast, waterlogged landscape that required a completely different kind of navigational genius. For centuries, the magnificent stone cities of the Swahili coast, places like Kilwa with its grand palace and mosque, and Mombasa with its bustling harbor, have captivated the imagination. From the decks of Arab dhows and Portuguese caravels, these settlements appeared as dazzling, almost mythical outposts of civilization, their wealth built on the gold and ivory that seemed to magically arrive from the vast, unknown interior. This perspective created a long-standing historical narrative that these were essentially foreign implants, cosmopolitan trading posts clinging to the edge of a dark and impenetrable continent, more connected to the wider Indian Ocean world than to the landmass at their backs. They were seen as the end of the line, the final destination for riches from a mysterious hinterland. But this view was fundamentally incomplete, a misconception born of a limited seaward gaze. The true story of how this gold and ivory actually reached the coast was one of the great missing chapters in African history, a mystery that satellite technology has now spectacularly solved, revealing that these cities were not the end of anything, but rather the brilliant, shining terminals of a vast and sophisticated continental system. The key to unlocking this mystery lay in the landscape itself, in the challenging terrain that separates the coast from the interior. Between the Indian Ocean and the gold-producing regions of the Zimbabwean Plateau lies a vast expanse of dense miombo woodland, a unique ecosystem characterized by tough, scrubby trees that can create a formidable barrier to travel. For generations, archaeologists speculated about the routes traders must have taken, but finding physical evidence on the ground was like searching for a needle in a continental haystack. This is where the synoptic, all-seeing view from orbit changed everything. By applying multispectral and radar imaging to the region, researchers could suddenly detect the faint, ancient signatures of human passage that were entirely invisible from the ground. What emerged from the satellite data was a masterclass in ancient logistics and environmental intelligence. The imagery revealed a complex web of feeder routes, not as a single, straight line, but as a branching network that displayed a profound understanding of the African environment. The satellite maps show these paths executing a deliberate and clever navigation of the landscape. Instead of plunging recklessly into the thickest parts of the miombo woodlands, the routes consistently skirt their edges, finding corridors of easier travel. Even more ingeniously, the imagery reveals that these ancient traders made extensive use of seasonal riverbeds, known as laghas. During the dry season, these sandy river courses become natural highways, providing a firm, open path through otherwise dense vegetation. The traders weren't just wandering, they were following a seasonal calendar, moving goods during the dry months when these natural corridors were at their most passable. This demonstrates a deep, generational knowledge of the land, an understanding of rainfall patterns, soil types, and vegetative growth that was essential for survival and efficiency. This was not a haphazard trek, it was a carefully managed, recurring commercial operation. These feeder routes, now clearly visible from space, lead directly to the heart of one of Africa's most powerful and enigmatic civilizations, Great Zimbabwe. Located hundreds of miles inland, this city of majestic stone enclosures and towering walls was the epicenter of a vast kingdom that controlled the rich gold fields and elephant herds of the interior. The satellite imagery provides the tangible, physical connection that historians had long theorized but could never before prove. We can now trace the path from the stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe, through the river valleys and around the woodlands all the way to the coast. This discovery fundamentally rewrites the historical relationship between the coast and the interior. The Swahili cities were not isolated city-states that passively received goods from the dark interior. They were active, integral partners in a single, unified economic system. The gold and ivory that funded the construction of Kilwa's magnificent Husuni Kubwa Palace, and that were traded for Chinese porcelain and Indian silks, were the direct result of a complex continent-spanning partnership. This was a symbiotic relationship built on mutual need and sophisticated specialization. The inland kingdoms like Great Zimbabwe possessed the raw resources and the political organization to extract and consolidate them. They mined the gold and managed the elephant herds, creating a steady supply of these high-value commodities. The Swahili cities, in turn, possessed the maritime technology, the international connections, and the mercantile expertise to integrate these African goods into the burgeoning global economy of the Indian Ocean. They were the window to the world, the brokers who understood the complex demands of markets in India, the Middle East, and beyond. Goods flowed both ways. While gold and ivory traveled east to the coast, fine textiles, glazed ceramics, and glass beads traveled west along these same paths into the interior, where they became symbols of status and power for the elites of Great Zimbabwe. The entire system was a testament to African agency, a network entirely conceived, managed, and profited from by African societies long before the arrival of Europeans. It reveals a continent that was not a passive recipient of global forces, but a dynamic and powerful generator of its own economic and cultural destiny, with the Swahili coast serving as the glittering, cosmopolitan face of a deeply connected continental powerhouse. This revelation of a lost, sophisticated civilization thriving in the heart of Africa, whose very existence was tied to its mastery of the landscape, finds a stunning and unexpected parallel on the other side of the world, beneath the seemingly pristine canopy of the world's largest rainforest. For centuries, the story of the Amazon was one we all thought we knew. It was the archetype of the primeval wilderness, a vast, untouched expanse of jungle so dense and so overwhelming that it could only support small, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, living in near isolation from one another and in perfect harmony with an environment they dared not alter. This narrative, popularized by early explorers and cemented in the public imagination, portrayed the Amazon as a counterfeit paradise, a place of deceptive lushness where the poor soils could never support the complex societies that arose in other parts of the world. It was a green desert, beautiful but barren for civilization. This entire understanding has now been completely overturned, not by a lone archaeologist with a machete, but by the silent, sweeping gaze of satellite and LIDAR technology. When researchers began analyzing satellite imagery of the Brazilian state of Acre and the Bolivian Amazon, they started noticing something strange. Etched into the landscape, visible only from high above, were enormous, precise geometric shapes. There were perfect circles, squares, and octagons, some over 300 meters across, connected by long, arrow-straight avenues that ran for miles. These were the geoglyphs, and their discovery sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. The true scale of the revelation, however, came with LIDAR. Flying over the dense canopy, the laser technology digitally stripped away millions of leaves and trees, revealing a landscape that had been utterly transformed by human hands. What appeared from the ground as uninterrupted rainforest was, in fact, a carefully managed, engineered garden city on a continental scale. The LIDAR maps showed that the geoglyphs were not isolated ceremonial sites. They were nodes in a vast, interconnected network. Those long, straight causeways were roads linking these enclosures to one another and to the region's river systems, the natural highways of the Amazon. This was the infrastructure of a society, a previously unknown civilization that had flourished for centuries and perhaps millennia, completely reshaping the environment to suit its needs. The purpose of the geoglyphs themselves is still debated. They were not towns in the traditional sense, as few artifacts are found within them. They appear to have been ceremonial centers, places for periodic gatherings, rituals, and perhaps markets, connected by a system of roads that allowed people and goods to move efficiently across a managed landscape. This discovery forces a complete rethink of what the Amazon was and what it is. This was not a pristine wilderness, it was a constructed environment. The indigenous people of the Amazon were not passive inhabitants of the jungle. They were its active, sophisticated managers, They practiced a form of bioengineering on a massive scale, creating what is now known as Amazonian dark earth or terra preta. This is not a natural soil, it is a human-made super soil, rich in charcoal, pottery shards, compost, and manure, a testament to centuries of deliberate soil enrichment. This incredibly fertile earth, which still exists in patches across the basin today, allowed for intensive agriculture that could support large, settled populations. They cultivated the forest itself, planting and nurturing valuable tree species like the Brazil nut and the palm, creating vast orchards that look like natural forest to the untrained eye, but are, in reality, the legacy of ancient agroforestry. This sophisticated land management supported the complex society that built the geoglyph network. The straight roads and causeways connecting these centers were the physical manifestation of a thriving trade network. This was not a simple barter system between neighbors. The Amazon is a repository of an immense variety of biological and cultural resources, and different regions specialized in different goods. From the Andes foothills, communities would trade precious stones and obsidian for making tools. From the river basins, specialized communities produced vast quantities of highly durable pottery, which has been found hundreds of miles from its source. But the most valuable trade goods were likely living plants, seeds, and the profound botanical knowledge of the rainforest's pharmacy. The Amazon is the world's greatest natural laboratory of medicinal plants. Knowledge of which plants could cure fevers, which could serve as potent painkillers, and which could be used as fish poisons or hallucinogens in religious ceremonies, would have been incredibly valuable intellectual property. This knowledge, along with the physical plants and seeds themselves, would have traveled along these geoglyph-connected roads, exchanged for other specialized goods like brightly colored feathers for ceremonial headdresses, salt, or finely woven textiles. The entire basin was a connected, pulsating network of exchange, a cultural and economic sphere that integrated the immense diversity of the rainforest into a coherent, functioning system. The society that built this network was not a small-scale chiefdom. It was a widespread, organized civilization with the collective will and manpower to reshape thousands of square miles of the most challenging environment on Earth. They moved Earth on a scale comparable to the mound builders of North America, digging enormous ditches to create the geoglyphs and piling the Earth into banks to form the causeways. They managed water flow, altered the composition of the forest, and created a sustainable agricultural system that fed a significant population without destroying the ecosystem upon which it depended. The discovery of the Amazonian geoglyph networks is arguably one of the most significant archaeological finds of the 21st century. It completely shatters the myth of the empty, pristine Amazon and replaces it with a story of human ingenuity, environmental mastery, and social complexity that rivals any of the classic ancient civilizations. It proves that the rainforest was not a barrier to civilization, but a cradle for a unique and profoundly different kind of civilization, one that worked with the forest rather than conquering it. This revelation of a lost world hidden beneath the lush canopy of the world's largest rainforest finds a powerful and poetic counterpoint in our next discovery, which takes us from this realm of overwhelming life and water to one of the most arid and lifeless places on the planet, where another ancient trade route was built around a commodity that literally fell from the stars. Scattered across the vast, wind-sculpted expanse of the Great Sand Sea in western Egypt lies one of the planet's most enigmatic natural treasures. Littering the dunes between towering waves of sand are countless fragments of a substance that seems utterly out of place, a translucent canary yellow glass, often as clear as fine crystal. This is Libyan desert glass, and its origin story is as dramatic as it is ancient. It was not forged in a volcano or crafted by human hands, but born from a cataclysm in the sky. 29 million years ago, a meteorite, or perhaps a comet, exploded just above the desert sands with the force of 1,000 nuclear bombs. The instantaneous, unimaginable heat, reaching temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun, instantly vaporized tons of silica-rich sand, hurling it into the air where it cooled and solidified into this otherworldly, pure glass as it fell back to Earth. For millennia, this cosmic confetti lay scattered across one of the most inhospitable places on the planet, a silent monument to a violent, celestial event. The conventional wisdom held that this glass was a mere geological curiosity, occasionally stumbled upon by nomadic tribes. But a much more fascinating story was hidden just beneath the surface of the sand, a story that satellite technology has only recently been able to read. When analysts began scrutinizing high-resolution satellite imagery of the Great Sand Sea, they were not just looking for the glass itself, but for the subtle, ancient signatures of the people who sought it. What they discovered rewrote the timeline of human interaction with this unique material. The imagery revealed a faint but unmistakable network of ancient paths, trails that converged with a clear and deliberate purpose on the primary concentration zones of the desert glass. These were not the random wanderings of lost travelers. These were destination routes carved into the landscape by generations of purposeful journeys. The paths, visible from space as linear depressions and alignments of ancient cairns, show that during the Pleistocene era, when the Sahara was a greener, wetter place, people were making deliberate, organized expeditions into this formidable desert for the sole purpose of collecting this cosmic glass. The logistics of these journeys would have been staggering. The Great Sand Sea is a labyrinth of dunes, a place of extreme temperatures and scarce water. To venture into its heart required not just courage, but sophisticated knowledge of desert survival and navigation. The existence of these mapped routes proves that the value of the glass was immense enough to justify the immense risk and effort. But what made this material so desirable? For the hunter-gatherers and early pastoralists of North Africa, Libyan desert glass was a super material. Its conchoidal fracture pattern allowed it to be knapped into tools that were phenomenally sharp, even sharper than the finest flint. Blades, arrowheads, and scrapers made from this glass would have been highly effective for processing game and working hides, giving their owners a significant technological advantage. Yet its value clearly extended far beyond mere utility. The glass's beautiful, translucent quality and its celestial origin, likely understood through myth and oral tradition, would have imbued it with profound spiritual significance. A dagger or a ceremonial pendant carved from this material was not just a tool, it was an object of power, a piece of the sky itself brought down to earth. One of the most famous testaments to its value lies not in the desert, but in the opulent tomb of the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun. Among his magnificent treasures, resting on his pectoral jewelry, is a beautifully carved scarab beetle. For decades, it was thought to be made of a common yellow chalcedony, but modern scientific analysis confirmed the truth. It is a piece of Libyan desert glass. This single artifact creates a tangible, breathtaking link across vast stretches of time and space. It connects the golden glory of 18th dynasty Egypt to the perilous, prehistoric journeys of North African peoples who, thousands of years before the first pyramid was ever conceived, braved the Great Sand Sea to collect this precious substance. The trade routes for this glass, now traced from space, represent one of the earliest and most extraordinary long-distance exchange networks in human history. It shows that the human drive to seek out unique, powerful, and beautiful resources is a fundamental part of our story, an impulse that could motivate people to conquer some of the world's most daunting landscapes. The trade in this cosmic material, a resource literally forged in a moment of astronomical violence, highlights a profound human truth that we have always looked to the world around us and even to the heavens above for materials that could improve our lives, empower our societies, and connect us to the sacred. While the golden glass of the desert was a rare and mystical treasure, the lifeblood of the Roman Empire was a substance far more common, yet no less vital: olive oil. Imagine the city of Rome at its zenith, a metropolis of over 1 million souls, its streets thronging with citizens, soldiers, and slaves. As dusk fell, the city did not descend into darkness. Instead, it was illuminated by thousands of flickering clay lamps, each one burning the same fuel that dressed the evening salad, cooked the daily meal, and cleansed the bodies of the populace in the public baths. This omnipresent golden liquid was the petroleum of its day, and the empire's insatiable demand for it created one of the most extensive and efficient supply chains the ancient world had ever seen. For a long time, historians understood the importance of olive oil from ancient texts and the staggering number of pottery shards found at archaeological sites, but the true continental scale of its production and distribution was a story told in fragments. Now, satellite imagery is weaving those fragments into a complete picture, revealing an agricultural and logistical machine of breathtaking proportions. The first clue lies in the land itself. Olive trees are tenacious, long-lived plants that leave a lasting signature on the soil. Using multispectral imaging, satellites can detect subtle variations in ground chemistry and vegetation health that betray ancient agricultural activity. When this technology is applied to regions like the rolling hills of Hispania Baetica in modern-day Spain or the coastal plains of Roman North Africa in modern-day Tunisia and Libya, the landscape lights up with a ghostly grid. The imagery reveals the faint, geometric patterns of long-vanished Roman centuriation, the methodical division of land into square plots for farming. More specifically, analysts can identify the unique spectral signature of land that was once dominated by olive groves. The tree's deep root systems alter the soil composition in a way that persists for centuries, and the patterns of these ancient orchards, aligned with Roman roads and irrigation channels, are now clearly visible from space, showing a level of organized monocrop cultivation that rivals modern agribusiness. But growing the olives was only the first step. The oil had to be stored and transported, and for this, the Romans relied on a humble yet revolutionary container, the amphora. These two-handled clay jars were the shipping containers of antiquity, and their distinctive shapes and stamps allow archaeologists to trace their origin. Satellite imagery has been instrumental in locating the massive industrial complexes where these amphorae were produced. From orbit, researchers have identified the telltale signs of Roman kilns, discolorations in the soil, deposits of clay waste, and the remains of workshops clustered in specific regions near the olive groves and, crucially, near coastlines and navigable rivers. The most famous of these containers for oil was the Dressel 20 amphora, a bulbous, robust vessel produced almost exclusively in southern Spain. The sheer volume of these amphorae found across the Roman world is staggering. Yet, the most dramatic evidence of this trade lies at the bottom of the sea. Satellite-driven underwater surveys, using sonar and magnetometry, have mapped the locations of countless Roman shipwrecks resting on the Mediterranean floor. These sunken time capsules, many still carrying their cargo of Dressel 20 amphorae, plot a precise map of the maritime highways of oil. The wrecks cluster along the predictable routes from the ports of Hispania, like modern-day Cadiz, and from North Africa, like Leptis Magna, heading north towards the central consumption hub of the empire, the city of Rome. Here, at the mouth of the Tiber River, stood the artificial Monte Testaccio, a hill over 100 feet tall composed almost entirely of broken amphorae, most of them dresseled 20 jars. This was the empire's recycling pile, the final destination for an estimated 53 million oil containers, a physical mountain of evidence testifying to a centuries-long, unrelenting flow of liquid calories and fuel. This logistical network was the backbone of Roman comfort and stability. The state-sponsored Annona system, which ensured the grain and oil supply for the capital's populace, was as crucial to maintaining political peace as the legions were. A disruption in the oil supply could lead to hunger, darkness, and civil unrest. The smooth, relentless operation of this system, from the sun-drenched groves of Hispania to the bustling ports across the treacherous sea lanes and finally to the warehouses and markets of Rome, was a testament to Roman organizational genius. It was a machine powered by the humble olive, an empire literally fueled by the fruit of the tree, its golden oil greasing the wheels of commerce, daily life, and imperial power for centuries. This mastery of moving a liquid commodity across an empire finds a powerful and tangible contrast in the next chapter of our story, where we will explore a trade built not on something that flows, but on something of immense, immovable solidity, the very stone used to build Rome's most enduring monuments. From the liquid flow of olive oil that fueled an empire, we turn now to the immense, solid mass of the very stones that built its most enduring symbols. The ambition of the Egyptian pharaohs was not measured in gold or territory alone, but in the scale of the monuments they left behind. Towering obelisks that pierced the sky and colossal columns that held up vast temple roofs were carved from a single, stubborn material, granite. This magnificent red and black stone, prized for its durability and its striking, speckled beauty, came from one primary source, the quarries of Aswan, located in the far south of Egypt. For generations, we have marveled at these finished monuments, but the true story of their creation, the epic journey from quarry to temple, was a logistical puzzle of almost superhuman proportions. How do you move a stone the weight of a small warship across hundreds of miles of desert? The answers were written into the desert floor around Aswan, faint scars that had faded over millennia, but which are now being brought into sharp, stunning focus by the precise gaze of satellite technology. The scale of the undertaking begins at the source. In the Aswan quarries, you can still visit the famous unfinished obelisk, a colossal shaft of granite that cracked and was abandoned before it could be freed from the bedrock. It lies there, three sides carved, a breathtaking testament to both the skill and the staggering ambition of the ancient stonemasons. This single piece of stone is over 130 feet long and weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. Just the act of carving it, using nothing more than dolomite pounders to painstakingly chip away at the rock, represents a monumental effort, but this was only the beginning. Once a suitable obelisk or column was successfully quarried, the real challenge commenced, moving it. For a long time, Egyptologists had theories, but the precise methods were speculative. Now, high-resolution satellite imagery has mapped the ancient landscape around Aswan with such detail that we can virtually reconstruct the entire, intricate process. The satellites have revealed a network of carefully prepared transport roads, wide, leveled pathways that led from the quarry faces down toward the Nile. These were not simple dirt tracks. The imagery shows they were reinforced with compacted gravel and stone, engineered to bear unimaginable weights without crumbling under the pressure. The most critical piece of infrastructure, however, was the system of canals and basins. The satellites, using radar and multispectral imaging, have detected the subtle, linear depressions and soil moisture signatures of ancient waterways that connected the quarries directly to the river. The Egyptians were master hydrologists. They didn't just hope for the annual Nile flood. they engineered it to serve their needs. They would dig canals from the Nile to the very edge of the quarry area. During the inundation season, when the river swelled, they would open sluice gates, allowing the water to flood these canals and create loading basins right beside the massive stones. The obelisk, resting on a massive, purpose-built wooden sledge, would then be laboriously inched down a giant, specially constructed earthen ramp and directly onto a waiting, super-sized barge. The imagery shows the remains of these colossal loading ramps, their broad, sloping forms still etched into the earth. Imagine the scene: thousands of workers chanting in unison, hauling on ropes, guiding a stone heavier than any modern crane could lift, sliding it with controlled precision onto a vessel that was itself a marvel of naval architecture. This was a moment where engineering, brute force, and an intimate understanding of natural cycles converged. The journey was not over once the stone was afloat. The barge, now carrying its incredible cargo, would then begin the long voyage north down the Nile. This was the easy part, but it was not without its perils. The current would carry them, but crews had to navigate the river's bends and currents, ensuring the top-heavy vessel didn't capsize. The destination was often hundreds of miles away, to the temple complexes at Karnak, Luxor, or all the way to the northern capital of Memphis. Upon arrival, the entire process had to be reversed. The barge was guided into another specially dug canal right up to the temple construction site. The obelisk was then dragged off the barge, up another massive ramp, and carefully raised into its vertical position, a feat of engineering that still inspires awe and debate among historians today. This entire operation, from quarry to erection, was a state project on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. It required the coordination of thousands of skilled workers, quarrymen, sailors, engineers, and laborers, all fed and housed by the pharaoh's administration. It was a massive drain on the royal treasury, but the payoff was immortality in stone. An obelisk was not just a piece of architecture, it was a petrified ray of the sun god, a symbol of the pharaoh's divine power and his ability to command both nature and humanity. The granite trade was not commerce in the traditional sense. It was the ultimate expression of state power, a demonstration that the king could move mountains, or at least pieces of them, to proclaim his glory for all eternity. This breathtaking mastery over the inanimate, moving mountains of stone across a kingdom finds a haunting and powerful echo in the next chapter of ancient trade, which involved the movement of not inert rock, but living, breathing, and equally massive creatures. The story of ancient trade is not always one of beautiful stones or fragrant resins. Sometimes it is a tale written in tragedy, a saga of human ambition that placed an impossible burden on the largest land animal on Earth. For empires like Carthage and Rome, the African elephant was not merely a creature of the wild. It was a living, breathing weapon of war and a source of almost mythical luxury. The Carthaginian general Hannibal's legendary crossing of the Alps with his war elephants is one of history's most iconic images, but behind that single campaign lay a vast, brutal, and systematic network dedicated to the capture, training, and transport of these magnificent animals. For centuries, the logistics of this operation were obscure, lost to time and the African landscape itself. How do you move dozens of multi-ton animals from their inland habitats to distant coastal ports and then across the sea? The answers were hidden in the very ecology of the continent, waiting for satellite technology to decipher the ancient paths of this sorrowful commerce. Modern satellite analysis has approached this mystery not by looking for roads, but by reconstructing the ancient environment itself. By modeling historical vegetation patterns, rainfall data, and the locations of permanent water sources, researchers can now map the most likely corridors these elephant caravans would have taken. Elephants are creatures of habit and necessity. They must drink daily and consume vast quantities of vegetation. Their movement is dictated by the availability of food and water. The satellite data reveals a clear logic to the routes. They weren't arbitrary paths cut through the wilderness. Instead, they consistently followed ancient migratory corridors, natural pathways that the elephants themselves had used for millennia. These were lines of life connecting seasonal grazing lands to reliable waterholes. The traders and hunters who supplied the empires simply co-opted these natural highways, establishing capture zones and holding pens at strategic points along these age-old trails. The imagery helps identify areas where these natural corridors narrow, such as between mountain ranges or at river crossings, perfect bottlenecks for rounding up and controlling herds. From these inland capture sites, the satellites then trace the routes leading toward the few viable coastal ports of North Africa, ports like those near ancient Carthage itself. The journey for a captured elephant was a harrowing ordeal. Driven by handlers on foot, the animals would be forced to march for weeks, their sheer weight compacting the earth on these paths in a way that, even centuries later, can sometimes be detected as subtle linear features in the satellite data, especially when compared with the more random patterns of natural animal movement. These were not joyous parades, they were death marches for many of the creatures, a slow, exhausting trek toward a life of servitude on a foreign battlefield. The primary driver of this network was a dual demand that placed the African elephant in an impossible position. The first was the military demand. In the Hellenistic period following Alexander the Great, the use of war elephants became the ultimate symbol of imperial power. Rival kingdoms like the Ptolemaic Egyptians and the Seleucids in the Middle East competed to field the largest number of these living tanks. Initially, they used the smaller, now extinct Syrian elephant, but as that population was hunted to oblivion, their gaze turned to the larger, more formidable African forest and bush elephants. The Carthaginians, lacking access to Asian elephants, developed their own sophisticated systems for capturing and training the North African elephant, a distinct subspecies that once roamed the Atlas Mountains. These animals were used to terrify and break enemy infantry lines, their sheer mass and the towers manned by archers on their backs creating a mobile fortress that could decide the outcome of a battle. The second, and perhaps even more relentless, demand was for ivory. In the Roman world, ivory was a supreme luxury good. It was carved into exquisite statuettes, used to veneer furniture, fashioned into intricate combs and cosmetic boxes for wealthy patrician women, and even inlaid into the doors of the most important public buildings. A single senator's demand for an ivory diptych, a hinged writing tablet, could cost the life of an elephant. This created a market that never slept, a constant pressure on the elephant populations from the Mediterranean coast deep into the continent's interior. The ecological consequences of this ancient trade were nothing short of catastrophic, and the evidence is stark. The very range of the African elephant tells the story. In antiquity, elephants were found across the entire northern coast of Africa, from the Nile Delta all the way to the Atlantic coast of Morocco. The great forests of the Atlas Mountains were their home. Roman mosaics and historical accounts describe them as a common feature of the landscape. Today, due to centuries of exploitation for the ivory and live animal trade that began in the classical era, the elephant has been completely eradicated from North Africa. The North African subspecies is extinct. The satellite maps of ancient vegetation compared to modern ones show a dramatic retreat of dense woodlands, a change driven in part by the loss of these great ecosystem engineers who play a crucial role in seed dispersal and maintaining the health of savannas and forests. This was not a sudden event, but a slow, grinding extinction that unfolded over centuries. a direct result of the economic systems of the ancient world. The Roman appetite for spectacle further accelerated this decline. Elephants were captured not just for war, but for the gladiatorial games, where they were forced to fight each other or were slaughtered in mass hunts for the entertainment of the populace. The scale was staggering. The Roman general Pompey once had 400 elephants killed in a single games event. This ancient exploitation established a pattern that has continued to the present day, a sobering reminder that humanity's capacity to drive species to the brink is not a modern invention, but a thread woven deep into the fabric of our history. The ghostly paths of the elephant trade, now traced from space, are not just routes of commerce. They are the scars of an early ecological disaster, a testament to a time when the might of empires was measured in part by their power to command and consume nature's greatest giants. This tragic narrative of a trade built on the subjugation of magnificent wildlife creates a powerful and intentional contrast with our next discovery, which follows the journey of a commodity valued purely for its breathtaking, inert beauty, a deep blue stone that traveled from a single, remote valley to adorn the tombs of pharaohs and the masterpieces of the Renaissance. The quest for a specific, breathtaking color could drive the creation of trade routes just as surely as the need for food or metal. In the ancient world, there was one color that held a special, almost magical allure. A deep, celestial blue, the color of the midnight sky, speckled with flecks of gold like distant stars. This was the color of lapis lazuli, and for thousands of years, there was only one place on the entire planet to find it in its most brilliant and vibrant form, deep within the remote, rugged mountains of the Sar-Isang Valley in what is now modern-day Afghanistan. Isolated by some of the most formidable terrain on Earth, this single source became the epicenter for a trade in beauty that would span continents and millennia, a network whose full, daring extent is only now being fully appreciated thanks to the mapping power of satellites. The journey of this stone from its mountainous cradle to the workshops of distant empires is a story of human desire overcoming incredible geographical obstacles. We knew the stone traveled far, but the precise paths it took were shrouded in the dust of deserts and the heights of forgotten passes. Now, satellite imagery has cut through that obscurity, charting a web of routes that reveals the sheer tenacity of these ancient merchants. The imagery shows these paths were not for the faint of heart. They were engineered for survival, not speed. The trails first had to descend from the treacherous Hindu Kush, navigating steep, rocky valleys where a single misstep could mean disaster for a laden caravan. From space, analysts can trace the logic of their descent, following river valleys that provided water and a gradual grade, but which also presented their own challenges with seasonal flooding and narrow gorges. Once out of the mountains, the routes then confronted one of the most brutal landscapes imaginable, the vast, waterless deserts of Iran. The satellite data reveals how the caravans navigated this sea of sand and rock. The imagery clearly shows the path stringing together a precious necklace of oases, those rare pockets of life where water bubbled up from underground aquifers. The distance between these oases was not random. It was calculated to match the distance a heavily burdened camel could travel in a day. The entire route was a carefully planned logistical operation, a life-or-death relay race across an arid expanse where knowing the location of the next well was more valuable than the cargo itself. The value of the cargo, however, was what made the entire perilous undertaking worthwhile. In the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, lapis lazuli was more than a decorative stone. It was a substance of profound symbolic power. For the Egyptians, its deep blue was associated with the heavens and the divine. It was the hair of their gods, the material used for the eyebrows on the funeral mask of Tutankhamun, and it was ground into a precious pigment to create the vibrant blue in tomb paintings that were meant to last for eternity. The famous Sumerian royal standard of a magnificent mosaic depicting war and peace, is inlaid with vast quantities of this Afghan lapis. To possess it was to possess a piece of the sky, a fragment of the divine order. It was a mandatory component of the most important religious and royal regalia, an indispensable element of power and piety. This connection is made stunningly tangible by a single, iconic artifact. When archaeologist Howard Carter first peered into the tomb of the pharaoh Tutankhamun, his candlelight fell upon, in his own words, wonderful things. Among the most wonderful was the pharaoh's funeral mask, a masterpiece of gold and inlay. The stripes of the Neme's headdress and the outlining of the eyes are made of a brilliant, dark blue material. Scientific analysis has confirmed that this blue stone is lapis lazuli, and its chemical signature points directly to the mines of Sar Isang in Afghanistan. This creates an almost unimaginable link across space and time. It connects the golden, sun-baked Valley of the Kings to a remote, rocky valley over 2,000 miles away. It means that the stone that gleams on the mask of a boy king who ruled Egypt over 3,000 years ago was pried from the earth by a miner in Central Asia, transported by merchants across deserts and mountains, passed through countless hands, and finally placed by an Egyptian craftsman onto the face of his god-king. The satellite-mapped routes are the very same paths that made this connection possible, the physical manifestation of a network that turned a local geological oddity into a global symbol of status and sanctity. The human drive to seek out and possess such a uniquely beautiful material, to brave immense dangers for a substance that had no practical use beyond its color and its symbolism, speaks volumes about our species. It shows that commerce in the ancient world was not just about survival or power, but also about beauty, spirituality, and the deep, innate need to adorn our world and connect with something greater than ourselves. The relentless pursuit of this singular blue stone, a quest that forged connections between vastly different cultures, finds a powerful and parallel story in another part of the ancient world, where a different color and a different stone held a similar, captivating power over the human imagination. For the ancient Maya, the most profound value was not found in the gleam of gold, but in the cool, translucent depths of a green stone. Jade was the ultimate substance of power, more precious than any metal, believed to hold the very breath of life, the essence of wind and mist, and the fundamental power of fertility and water. To the Maya, its color was the color of the life-giving maize plant, of the lush rainforest canopy, and of the cenotes that provided sacred water. It was the stone of the gods, and to possess it was to hold a piece of the divine. For centuries, the precise mechanics of how this sacred material moved from its geological source to the hands of kings were obscured by the relentless jungle. We knew the Maya had jade, and we knew of great cities like Tikal and Kapan, but the connective tissue, the actual roads, and the political control behind them remained one of Mesoamerica's great enigmas. The dense canopy of Guatemala and Honduras had effectively erased the map of this royal trade. That is, until LIDAR technology performed its now familiar magic, digitally deforesting the landscape to reveal a hidden web of ambition and control. The laser scans unveiled an astonishing network of wide, raised causeways known as Sakbiab, which translates poetically to white roads. These were not mere footpaths. They were engineered highways elevated above the swampy ground, paved with limestone plaster that would have gleamed brightly under the tropical sun, cutting perfectly straight lines through the undulating green wilderness. What the LIDAR data made stunningly clear was that these causeways did not simply connect random cities. They formed a deliberate, strategic network linking the few, critically important jadate mines in the Motagua River Valley of Guatemala directly to the powerhouse royal capitals of the classic Maya period. We can now trace a literal road of power running from the source of the stone straight to the grand plazas of Tikal, its broad causeway serving as a permanent supply line for the city's glory. We can see another route snaking its way to Capon in modern-day Honduras, a journey of hundreds of miles, demonstrating that the reach of this trade was continental in scale. The very existence of these dedicated, engineered roads tells us that this was not a simple, free market exchange. This was a state-controlled monopoly. The royal families of the major city-states did not just trade for jade. They owned the entire process from the mine to the marketplace. They stationed their own officials at the quarry sites to control output. They organized the labor to build and maintain the causeways. They managed the caravans of porters who would have carried the raw, heavy boulders along these gleaming white roads. Controlling the flow of jade was as fundamental to Maya kingship as leading an army or conducting a ceremony. It was the primary economic tool for building and maintaining political alliances. A lesser lord who remained loyal to a powerful king in Tikal would be rewarded with raw jade or finished objects, cementing his allegiance. Conversely, to cut off the supply of jade was a profound political and spiritual attack, a way to diminish a rival's power and his connection to the gods. The objects crafted from this sacred stone were not merely decorative, they were essential props in the theater of royal power. When a king was crowned, he held a ceremonial bar made of jade, a symbol of his authority to bridge the earthly and supernatural realms. In death, kings were buried in jade from head to toe. A mosaic jade mask would be placed over their face, jade beads filled their mouths, and jade ornaments were placed on their chest and hands, all intended to magically transform the deceased ruler into a god, ensuring his successful journey to the afterlife and his continued favor for his people. A single royal tomb, like that of the great Tikal King Jasorchan Kayawil, could contain many pounds of exquisitely carved jade. By meticulously mapping this network of causeways from the mines to the palaces, satellite and LIDAR imagery have given us a completely new understanding of the Maya political landscape. We can now see the hierarchy of cities laid bare in stone and earth. The cities with the widest, most direct causeways to the jade sources were the superpowers of their day. Smaller centers connected by narrower, more indirect paths were the vassals, the clients who received their sacred stone as a trickle down from their more powerful overlords. This jade network was the physical manifestation of the classic Maya world order, a system of divine kingship, political alliance, and economic control, all built upon the foundation of a beautiful green stone that was, to them, the crystallized heart of creation itself. We now travel from the green jungles of the Maya to the stark, sun-baked beauty of the American Southwest, to a canyon that seems an unlikely setting for a great civilization. Chaco Canyon, in what is now New Mexico, is a vast, arid expanse, a place of brutal summers and piercing winters. Yet, 1,000 years ago, this was the epicenter of a cultural and economic phenomenon. The ancestral Pueblones constructed a dozen monumental, great houses here, multi-storied structures of precisely cut sandstone blocks, containing hundreds of rooms and enormous ceremonial kivas, all aligned to the cycles of the sun and moon. For a long time, the sheer scale of Chaco was a profound mystery. How could such a seemingly inhospitable place support a complex society capable of such grand architecture? The answer, it turns out, was written not just in the canyon stone, but in a vibrant blue-green stone that arrived from astonishing distances. Chaco Canyon was not a city in the traditional sense, with a dense residential population. Instead, it appears to have been a grand ceremonial and economic magnet, a pilgrimage center whose power was built upon a continent spanning trade in a single, spiritually charged commodity, turquoise. This beautiful stone, ranging in color from sky blue to deep verdigris, was the ultimate symbol of water, life, and fertility in a desert world. It was the physical embodiment of the precious rain and the life-giving sky, and its possession was a source of immense spiritual and political authority. The great houses of Cacao, like Pueblo Bonito, have yielded treasures that stagger the imagination. Archaeologists have uncovered over 200,000 individually crafted turquoise beads, along with pendants, mosaics, and even entire baskets filled with raw, unworked stones. The sheer volume is unprecedented in North America. For decades, the origin of all this turquoise was a subject of intense debate. Were there local sources? Or was Chaco's wealth imported? The mystery deepened because the nearest significant turquoise mines were not in New Mexico, but hundreds of miles away, in what is now Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado. The logistical challenge of bringing such immense quantities of stone across such vast, rugged distances seemed almost insurmountable. This is where satellite imagery stepped in to map the impossible. Using multispectral analysis, researchers were able to identify the unique mineral signatures of turquoise deposits from space. They could then trace the paths leading away from these ancient mines. The satellite data revealed a complex, branching network of trails that converged with an unmistakable purpose on the great houses of Cacao Canyon. These were not just wandering footpaths. They were well-defined trade routes, some wide enough for processional movement, that navigated the most efficient courses through mountain passes and across desert plains. The imagery showed how these paths connected the canyon directly to the famous mines of Cerrillos, New Mexico, and even to sources as far away as the Cerrillos Hills and the distant mines of Nevada. But the story of Chaco's trade network becomes even more extraordinary. The flow of goods was not a one-way street. While turquoise flowed into the canyon, other, even more exotic items were flowing out. Deep within the rooms of Pueblo Bonito, archaeologists made a startling discovery: the skeletons of scarlet macaws. These are vibrantly colored parrots native to the humid rainforests of Mesoamerica, over 1,000 miles to the south. Their feathers, a brilliant, sacred red, were highly prized for ceremonial costumes and prayer sticks. Furthermore, they found copper bells, crafted using a distinct lost wax technique that was unique to the advanced metalworkers of West Mexico. These were not local products. They were tangible evidence of a trade connection that spanned the entire North American continent. The turquoise from the southwestern deserts was being exchanged for the tropical feathers and metalwork of Mesoamerica. This was not a direct, face-to-face exchange between Puebloan and Aztec merchants, but rather a long chain of down-the-line trade, where goods passed from community to community, culture to culture, in a vast, intercontinental relay race. A macaw feather or a copper bell in Cacao represented the final link in a chain of human interaction that connected the deserts of the Southwest to the great civilizations of central Mexico. This discovery fundamentally shatters the old, persistent myth of a pre-Columbian North America that was isolated and disconnected from the major cultural currents of the hemisphere. It reveals a continent that was, in fact, intricately linked by sophisticated economic networks. Cacao Canyon was not an isolated anomaly. It was a crucial northern terminus in a system of exchange that moved ideas, rituals, and goods across thousands of miles. The spiritual leaders of Cacao, by controlling the flow of this sacred blue stone, positioned their canyon as a pivotal crossroads, a place where the spiritual power of the north met the material and cultural wealth of the south. The legacy of this trade is a powerful reminder that even in the most challenging environments, human societies have an incredible capacity to build connections, to seek out the beautiful and the exotic, and to weave together diverse worlds through the simple, enduring act of exchange. Our journey now takes us from the vibrant blue turquoise of the Americas to the red earth and transformative glow of the Forge in West Africa. For a long time, the narrative of technological advancement in sub-Saharan Africa was fragmented and often underestimated by the broader historical community. That perspective has been fundamentally rewritten by the discovery of the Nok culture, a civilization that flourished in what is now Nigeria over 2,500 years ago. The Nok left behind one of the most distinctive and breathtaking artistic traditions in all of human history, a collection of terracotta sculptures so sophisticated and lifelike that their discovery stunned the art world. These are not crude idols. They are hauntingly beautiful human figures with elaborate, intricate hairstyles, pierced eyes, and expressions of profound humanity, capturing a glimpse into a sophisticated society with complex beliefs and a highly developed aesthetic sense. Yet for generations, these magnificent sculptures were cultural orphans, brilliant artifacts from a society whose full economic and technological foundations remained a profound mystery. How did this culture support the specialized artists who created these masterpieces? What was the engine of their economy? The answers were hidden not just in the clay, but in the very rocks beneath their feet, and it took the analytical power of satellites to uncover the connection. Satellite-based mineral surveys have performed a kind of geological detective work, scanning the region of the Nok's influence for the unique spectral signatures of iron ore deposits. The imagery successfully pinpointed ancient sources of this critical raw material, revealing where the Nok people extracted the ore that would fuel a technological revolution. But the story didn't end at the mine shafts. The satellite data went further, showing a clear and deliberate network of paths radiating outwards from these ore sources like spokes on a wheel. These ancient tracks, visible as faint trails in the multispectral imagery, did not wander aimlessly. They led directly to areas where the highest concentrations of those iconic Nok terracotta sculptures have been discovered. This is the crucial link that was missing for so long. It paints a vivid picture of a coordinated, thriving economic system. It suggests that the people who mastered the fiery process of smelting iron were the very same society that supported the master sculptors who worked with fire to harden their clay. The two technologies, one utilitarian, one artistic, were not separate threads, but intertwined strands of the same advanced culture, spreading together along these newly mapped trade routes. The implications of this are staggering. The ability to smelt iron was a transformative leap, a shift that historians often call the Iron Age, and its independent emergence in West Africa at such an early date is a testament to the ingenuity of the Nok people. This was not a technology borrowed from elsewhere. It was a local innovation that changed everything. Iron tools are far superior to their stone or copper counterparts. An iron hoe can till tougher soil, allowing for more productive agriculture and supporting larger, more concentrated populations. An iron axe can clear forests more efficiently, opening up new land for settlement and farming. Iron-tipped weapons and tools would have given the Nok significant advantages in both defense and daily life. The wealth generated from this advanced metallurgy, from producing and trading superior tools and weapons, would have created the economic surplus necessary to support a class of specialized artisans. These were the sculptors who did not need to farm for their own survival because the society's iron-based economy could sustain them, freeing them to dedicate their lives to perfecting their art and creating the spiritual and cultural objects that define the Nok world. This discovery does more than just connect minds to artworks. It forcefully pushes back the timeline for complex, technologically advanced society in this part of Africa. The Nok culture, with its sophisticated art and its mastery of iron, was flourishing centuries earlier than many traditional models had suggested. It places West Africa firmly on the map as one of the world's early, independent cradles of metallurgy and social complexity. The iron roads of the Nok were not just paths for moving lumps of ore, they were the conduits for a whole package of cultural and technological advancement. The knowledge of how to build and operate a smelting furnace, the skills to work the hot metal, and the artistic canon for creating those magnificent terracotta figures all traveled together along these routes, connecting communities and creating a shared cultural identity across a wide region. This pattern of a transformative technology spreading along established pathways finds a fascinating and very different parallel in our next discovery, which follows the global journey of a creature so common today that we hardly give it a second thought. Yet its ancient dispersal across continents tells a story of human migration, cultural exchange, and adaptation that is every bit revolutionary as the spread of iron. From the transformative power of iron smelted in West Africa, we now trace a much softer, yet equally revolutionary, form of exchange, the journey of a humble barnyard fowl that would one day become the world's most numerous bird. The story of the chicken begins not in a grand palace or a bustling market, but in the dense, humid jungles of Southeast Asia, where the red jungle fowl was first coaxed into a partnership with humanity. For generations, archaeologists pieced together this global journey one bone fragment at a time, analyzing skeletal remains found in ancient trash heaps and burial sites. But this biological evidence, while crucial, only gave us isolated dots on the map. The thrilling connection of those dots, the revelation of the actual pathways this bird traveled, has come from an entirely different field of vision, the view from orbit. By superimposing the locations of the oldest archaeological chicken bones onto satellite-mapped ancient trade routes, a stunningly clear picture has emerged. We can now watch in a digital recreation as the chicken spreads from its Southeast Asian homeland, moving not as a wild species, but as a carefully managed and transported commodity, its journey perfectly mirroring the greatest conduits of human interaction. The primary highway for this feathered migrant was without a doubt the Silk Road. The satellite data shows a clear correlation. The oldest chicken bones found in Central Asia, Persia, and eventually Europe appear at settlements and caravanserais that were direct nodes on that sprawling network. Traders and travelers did not carry chickens for a single meal. They carried live birds, a walking, clucking source of fresh eggs and eventual meat that could sustain them on their long, arduous journeys. As these merchants settled at oasis towns or mixed with new cultures, their chickens intermingled with local flocks, creating a slow but steady westward creep of domestication. But the Silk Road was not the only path. Satellite imagery has also illuminated a southern dispersal route, one that shows chickens moving by sea. The same monsoon-driven trade networks that carried spices and gems across the Indian Ocean also carried poultry. The birds were likely kept on ships as a sustainable food source for the crew, and when these vessels made landfall in East Africa, the chickens came ashore, establishing themselves along the Swahili coast and then gradually moving inland along the same feeder routes that carried gold and ivory to the coast. This was not a rapid invasion, but a slow, centuries-long diffusion, a wave of feathered settlement that followed the contours of human exploration and commerce. To view the chicken as merely a source of protein, however, is to miss the profound cultural significance that fueled its spread. This was not an animal that was simply eaten. It was an animal that was revered, feared, and ritualized. In many Southeast Asian cultures, chickens held deep spiritual importance. They were used in divination rituals, where the patterns of their entrails or the way they pecked at grains were believed to reveal the will of the gods. Cockfighting was not just a brutal pastime, it was a sacred activity, a symbolic battle that mirrored cosmic struggles and was used to settle disputes and honor ancestors. As the chicken traveled, so did these beliefs. The Romans, for instance, used chickens for augury, consulting their feeding habits before major battles to determine if the gods favored their endeavors. This ritual value often made the chicken a prized trade item in its own right, a living, breathing religious artifact that was worth carrying across continents. The spread of the chicken, therefore, acts as a brilliant proxy, a biological marker for human migration and cultural contact. Finding the bones of a domesticated chicken in an archaeological site in Germany or Sudan is not just evidence of a changed diet, it is evidence of a connection. It tells us that the people living at that site were in contact, directly or indirectly, with the wider world. They had traded with, traveled with, or been visited by people from a culture that had already integrated the chicken into its way of life. The bird's journey is a map of human interaction, written not in pottery styles or weapon designs, but in DNA and bone chemistry. This slow, purposeful dispersal of a domesticated animal for food and ritual stands in stark contrast to our next and final rediscovered route, which involves the trade of a creature that was the epitome of wild, untamed spirit and swift, living prestige. While the chicken's journey was one of slow, widespread diffusion, the movement of another animal was a story of selective, high-stakes exchange, centered on a creature that was the very embodiment of wind and fire. The Arabian horse, with its distinctive dished face, high-carried tail, and legendary endurance, was not merely a beast of burden in the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. It was a member of the family, a living treasure bred for centuries by the Bedouin tribes for speed, stamina, and an almost uncanny intelligence. These were not horses built for pulling heavy plows or carrying armored knights. They were refined, elegant athletes, perfectly adapted to the harsh realities of desert life, capable of surviving on minimal water and covering vast distances at a pace that could outrun any pursuer. For a long time, the scale of the breeding operations that produced these magnificent animals and the precise routes by which they entered the global stage were stories told in poetry and oral tradition, their physical evidence seemingly lost to the shifting sands. But the desert, as we have learned, is a master of preservation, and satellite imagery has now illuminated the sophisticated infrastructure that made this legendary trade possible. The key to breeding large numbers of horses in an arid environment is, unsurprisingly, water. When researchers trained multispectral sensors on the sites of ancient oasis settlements in regions like the Najd in Central Arabia, they discovered something remarkable. The imagery revealed the extensive, ghostly outlines of sophisticated water management systems that far exceeded the needs of a simple human settlement. They detected the patterns of ancient canals and irrigation channels radiating out from central springs, distributing water to vast, enclosed pastures. They identified the remains of massive, circular stone enclosures that could only have been corrals for managing large herds. This was not a haphazard operation. It was organized, large-scale equine husbandry. These oasis hubs were the equivalent of elite stud farms, where specific bloodlines were carefully curated and protected, their purity guarded as fiercely as any state secret by the tribes who developed them. The value of these horses was not in their muscle for labor, but in their unparalleled performance as vehicles of war and symbols of status. Their arrival in the wider world fundamentally altered the dynamics of power. The routes these ships of the desert traveled are now clearly inferred by overlaying the locations of these breeding centers with the well-established trade corridors we have already explored. From the Arabian heartland, the primary path led north and east, following the incense trails toward the powerful empires of Persia and Mesopotamia. The Achaemenid Persians, and later the Parthians and Sasanians, were quick to recognize the military advantage offered by these swift, agile horses. They integrated them into their famed cavalry, creating lighter, faster units that could outmaneuver the heavier, slower formations of their enemies. This exchange was not a one-way street. The breeding centers of Arabia became magnets for wealth, attracting gold, silks, and other luxuries in return for these living assets. Another major route shot northwards into the Levant and Egypt, where the horse became a staple of chariotry and later, of the elite mounted forces of the Ptolemaic and Roman worlds. But perhaps the most significant journey began when these horses were loaded onto specially designed transport ships and carried across the Arabian Sea to the courts of India. Here, they were crossed with local stock to create new, potent breeds like the Kathiawari and the Marwari, famous for their inward-turning ear tips, which became the foundation for the formidable cavalries of Indian Rajputs and Mughal emperors. The impact of this trade rippled across continents and centuries. In medieval Europe, the blood of the Arabian horse, introduced through trade with the Islamic world and later through the Crusades, would ignite a genetic revolution. It was infused into heavier European stock, lending its refinement, stamina, and spirit to create the foundational lines of virtually every modern light horse breed, from the thoroughbred racehorse to the Andalusian. The Arabian horse was more than a weapon, it was a catalyst. It changed the very art of warfare, favoring speed and strategy over brute force. It became a universal currency of prestige, a gift between kings that carried with it an unspoken message of power, wealth, and access to the finest things the world had to offer. This living, breathing commodity, traded along routes now traced from space, did not just carry riders, it carried entire cultures on its back, transforming societies from the battlefields of Persia to the stud farms of England. As we have traced the paths of silk, salt, and gemstones, we arrive now at the 30th and final rediscovered route, one that carried a commodity of a profoundly different nature, an idea. The spread of Buddhism from its birthplace in the Ganges plain across the vast expanse of Asia is one of history's great spiritual journeys, a story of monks and missionaries traversing thousands of miles to share a new vision of the world. For centuries, the narrative of this expansion was pieced together from ancient texts and the grand, famous monasteries that survived the ages. But the full, intimate geography of this movement, the daily footsteps of countless pilgrims, the remote hermitages that offered solace, the small, forgotten stupas that marked a safe passage remained frustratingly incomplete. We knew the spiritual river had flowed, but we could not see all the capillary streams that fed it. This is where the quiet observation of satellites has illuminated the path, revealing that the highways of faith were, in fact, the very same roads that carried the material wealth of continents. The connection is not merely coincidental, it is deeply, fundamentally symbiotic. When researchers began analyzing satellite imagery along the corridors of the Silk Road, they were not just looking for caravanserais or lost cities. They trained their digital eyes on the landscape, searching for the distinctive architectural signatures of Buddhist sites. What they discovered was a pattern of profound strategic logic. The imagery has helped pinpoint the locations of remote monasteries and chapels built not in isolated, inaccessible mountain fastnesses chosen solely for ascetic retreat, but deliberately positioned along the established commercial arteries. These spiritual way stations were often situated a day's walk apart, mirroring the practical spacing of trading posts. They were built near reliable water sources and in passes that offered protection from the elements, the same features that made these locations ideal for merchants and their caravans. A monk traveling from India to China did not blaze a new trail through trackless wilderness. He followed the well-worn and, more importantly, well-supplied paths of the silk and spice traders. The satellite data shows a stunning overlap. The distribution of these religious sites, from the rock-cut monasteries of the Gandhara region to the cave temples of Dunhuang, perfectly mirrors the distribution of traded goods. Where Chinese silk and Roman glass have been found, so too are the foundations of stupas and the remnants of monastic libraries. This is not a parallel system, it is a single, integrated network. The same camels that carried bolts of silk and sacks of pepper also carried sacred Sanskrit texts, bundled carefully alongside more mundane cargo. The merchant and the monk were often fellow travelers, their journeys fueled by the same infrastructure of survival. The merchant provided the material context, the roads, the safe passage, the shared camps, while the monk provided spiritual solace, literacy, and a cosmopolitan world view that itself became a valuable intellectual commodity. The Great Silk Road was, in every meaningful sense, also a Dharma road, a conduit for a philosophy that would transform the cultures of China, Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia. This relationship was a two-way street of immense cultural consequence. The monasteries that satellite imagery has helped relocate were not just passive shelters, they were dynamic hubs of cultural and economic exchange. A monk from India might barter his knowledge of astronomy or medicine for a merchant's protection on the next leg of the journey. Within the monastery walls, a trader from Persia might hear the teachings of the Buddha for the first time, and a Chinese pilgrim might acquire a newly translated scripture to carry back to the imperial court. These institutions often became wealthy in their own right, receiving donations from pious merchants who had profited from the very trade routes the monasteries facilitated. This wealth allowed them to commission magnificent art, creating the breathtaking statues and murals that synthesized Indian, Greek, and Central Asian influences into a new, uniquely Buddhist artistic language. The faith itself adapted and evolved along these routes, absorbing local deities and traditions, transforming from the original teachings of the Buddha in India into the diverse schools of Mahayana that flourished in Tibet and East Asia. The satellite rediscovered trails make it clear that Buddhism did not spread as an abstract set of ideas transmitted through texts alone. It moved as a living, breathing culture, carried on the backs of camels and in the hearts of travelers, its physical expansion inextricably linked to the practical realities of commerce. It was a grand, centuries-long conversation, facilitated by the simple, enduring human need to trade, to travel, and to connect. And as we stand at the precipice of this new era, it's clear that the 30 ghostly highways we've just explored are merely the opening chapter in a story that is expanding at a breathtaking pace. The future of discovery is being written not in field journals, but in data centers and clean rooms, where the next generation of orbital sentinels is being prepared for launch. These are not merely incremental upgrades, they represent a quantum leap in our ability to see the invisible. We are moving beyond multispectral imaging into the realm of hyperspectral sensing, where satellites can detect hundreds of individual wavelengths of light, creating a unique chemical fingerprint for every material on the planet's surface. Imagine being able to distinguish the spectral signature of ancient, decomposed adobe from the surrounding soil, or identifying the mineral residue of long-vanished metalworking sites, all from an altitude of 400 miles. This isn't science fiction, it's the immediate future of archaeology. Combined with radar systems of such sensitivity they can detect the slightest subsurface variations, these new eyes in the sky promise to reveal the faintest whispers of human activity, paths so old they've been erased from living memory, and foundations so deeply buried they've left no trace for the traditional archaeologist to find. One of the most tantalizing frontiers lies not on dry land but beneath the waves, during the last ice age, when vast amounts of water were locked up in glaciers. Global sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today. Entire continental shelves were dry, fertile land, crisscrossed by rivers and home to thriving human populations. As the world warmed and the seas rose, these coastal plains, these potential cradles of early civilization, were inundated and lost. The next wave of satellite archaeology is poised to find them, using advanced satellite-based bathymetry, which can map the seafloor topography by analyzing subtle variations in the ocean surface. Researchers are already creating detailed maps of these drowned landscapes. They are identifying the ghostly river valleys and potential settlement sites now lying dozens of miles offshore. The discovery of just one preserved site from this lost world, a prehistoric village frozen in time under layers of marine sediment, could revolutionize our understanding of human migration and the peopling of the continents, revealing chapters of our story that were thought to be forever lost to the deep. Simultaneously, in places like the Amazon, the process of discovery is shifting from finding individual sites to mapping entire civilizations. The geoglyphs and causeways we've already found are now understood to be just the most prominent features of a vastly more complex landscape. The next phase of LIDAR scanning, deployed from satellites and high-altitude aircraft, will allow us to digitally strip away the canopy across millions of square miles, not just hundreds. This will enable us to see the full extent of the Amazonian urban network, the hierarchy of settlements, the interconnectedness of the road systems, and the true scale of the land management that sustained this society. We will no longer be asking if complex civilizations existed in the Amazon, but rather how many there were, how they interacted, and what ultimately led to their transformation. We are on the verge of completing a map of a continent that has been hidden in plain sight for 5 centuries, a revelation that will permanently alter the historical identity of the Americas. The sheer volume of data generated by these new technologies is so immense that the human brain alone can no longer process it. This is where artificial intelligence enters the picture, not as a replacement for the archaeologist, but as an indispensable partner. AI algorithms are now being trained to scan millions of satellite images, learning to recognize the subtle, often non-intuitive patterns that indicate buried structures. They can process in a single day what would take a team of human analysts a lifetime, flagging thousands of potential sites for further investigation. This is accelerating the pace of discovery from a slow trickle to a torrent. The eye doesn't get tired, it doesn't have preconceived notions, and it can cross-reference geological data, historical maps, and climatic models to predict where human activity was most likely to have occurred. It is a force multiplier of unprecedented power, turning every researcher into the director of a vast digital survey team. This convergence of technologies, higher resolution sensors, penetrating radar, and intelligent machine learning suggests a staggering possibility. The vast majority of humanity's long story, perhaps over 90% of it, is still buried, unexcavated, and waiting for its signal to be received from orbit. We have been studying history with a tiny flashlight, illuminating only the most obvious monuments and written records. Now we are flipping a switch that lights up the entire stage, revealing the countless ordinary people, the local trade routes, the seasonal camps, and the forgotten migrations that truly shaped our world. This technological horizon does more than just add new sites to the map. It fundamentally forces us to reconsider the very purpose and nature of these ancient networks. We can no longer view them as simple, linear paths for moving luxury goods. Instead, we must see them as the fundamental nervous system of humanity, a global web of interaction that has been pulsing with life for tens of thousands of years. They were conduits for genes, languages, technologies, and ideas. They were buffers against climate change and catalysts for social complexity. The future of satellite archaeology promises to show us that our planet is not just a globe of separate countries, but a single, interconnected archaeological site, every inch of it inscribed with the enduring story of human connection. So as we draw our journey across these 30 ghostly highways to a close, we are left with a profound realization that reshapes our very understanding of human history. These are not merely paths etched in sand and stone, they are the fundamental circuitry of civilization itself, the channels through which the lifeblood of our shared story, goods, ideas, and people, has pulsed for thousands of years. They demonstrate with stunning clarity that our world has always been profoundly interconnected, long before the modern term globalization was ever spoken. This ancient web of exchange was the original internet, a physical network that moved not just silk and spices, but philosophies, faiths, and technologies, weaving together the destinies of continents. The courage of the Trans-Saharan merchant facing a sea of sand, the skill of the Polynesian navigator reading the stars on an open ocean, the determination of the Himalayan salt trader ascending a breathless pass. Their stories are a universal testament to human ingenuity and resilience, a shared heritage written in the language of movement and connection. As we now look down from the silent vantage of space upon these faint, resurrected traces, we are gifted with a new perspective. Our history is not confined to dusty tomes or museum cases. It is inscribed upon the very skin of the earth, a living, breathing document waiting for us to learn how to read it. Each of these routes from the Amber Road to the Songlines carries a unique lesson. They teach us about the power of faith to travel alongside commerce, as seen on the Buddhist missionary trails. They reveal the deep, spiritual connection between people and their land, as embodied by the Aboriginal dreaming tracks. They show us that trade could be a matter of stark survival, as with the Darb El-Arba'in salt caravans, or a driver of devastating ecological change, as with the African elephant trade. They prove that complex societies rose in the most unexpected places, from the Amazon rainforest to the Mississippi Valley, challenging our oldest assumptions about where civilization could flourish. This grand, interconnected tapestry, now being revealed piece by piece from orbit, invites us all to become explorers in our own right. It asks us to look at the world map not as a collection of separate nations, but as a single, dynamic landscape still whispering the secrets of its past. Let these incredible discoveries inspire you to look at your own world with fresh curiosity. Perhaps you will see a local landscape, a river, or a mountain range not as a static feature, but as a potential part of a story that has been unfolding for millennia. We would love to hear which of these ancient highways captured your imagination most vividly. Was it the sheer audacity of the Polynesian seafaring highways, the sacred geometry of the Amazonian geoglyph networks, or the poignant story of the Libyan desert glass, a treasure born from the stars? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation about our wonderfully interconnected